Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from, also what time is it. It was never supposed to be found. The house stood alone, deep in the pines of eastern Oregon. No address, no road signs, no record on any map. You could drive for hours, GPS signal dying 1 mile at a time, until finally the trees swallowed the sky, and the asphalt turned to gravel, and the gravel turned to mud. Then, as if the forest had split itself open, it would appear through the mist gray, warped, and watching. Locals didn't speak of it, not out of fear, out of a quiet collective understanding, as if the place was too tired to hurt anyone anymore. But of course, that wasn't true. Mara Kimball was not a believer in ghosts. As a documentary filmmaker known for debunking haunted legends, she lived for dragging the skeletons out of rural America's most whispered about houses, and showing the world that behind every ghost story was just mold, grief, and someone with too much time and not enough therapy. But the house in the pines, this one was different. The email she got didn't come from a town council or a curious fan. It came from a man named Clay Mercer, a former surveyor who vanished in 1996 and was legally declared dead in 2005. The message came from his old AOL account. No subject line, just coordinates and 3 words typed in all caps, Doiki AR. At first, Mara assumed it was a joke. One of those viral marketing campaigns, maybe. But when she checked the coordinates with old forestry maps, she found something that made her scalp prickle. That area was sealed off decades ago after a fire that burned for 10 straight days. Hundreds of acres gone, but no property records, no official mention of a structure. And yet the satellite image showed a shadow. 4 pointed. A roof. She couldn't ignore it. Something deep in her gut whispered, if you don't look into this, you'll never sleep again. She packed light. 3 handheld cameras, a drone, batteries, a flashlight, instant Raymond, her red moleskine, and an old crucifix she'd never used but always brought. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. Not her producer, not her sister, not even the fan forum she posted weekly updates to. This story was hers. When she reached the forest entrance, she found the gate chained shut. Spray painted in red were the words Nuno Hungiar 2 ODEP, whatever that meant. She climbed over, heart racing with the thrill she always felt at the edge of a mystery. She filmed everything. Her boots squelching through the mud. The silence of the pines, too perfect, too still. No birds, no wind, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. She walked for 3 hours before she saw it. The house looked wrong, not broken or old, just tired. Its wood was soaked in moss. Nails rusted to black. The porch steps sagged in the middle. The front door hung slightly ajar, like a mouth waiting to speak. But it wasn't the condition that made her freeze. It was the windows. Every single one of them was blacked out from the inside. Not boarded. Covered. As if whatever was inside wanted no light. Or maybe no eyes. Mara's breath fogged as she stepped onto the porch. Her camera trembled in her hands, but she kept rolling. There were no sounds. Not even the creak of wood. Just the faint tick of her own heartbeat and the slow, rhythmic hiss of breath she didn't realize wasn't hers. The door opened before she touched it. Inside, it smelled like old earth and copper. The air was damp, but not cold. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, the kind with little floral patterns your grandmother might have liked. But there were no furnishings, no dust, no cobwebs. The house was clean. Maintained. She half expected to hear a vacuum running in the next room. Then she found the first chair. It was in the corner of the living room, a small wooden rocking chair facing the wall. There were scratches in the floor, as if it had been pushed back repeatedly. Fast. Violently. She walked around it, and her stomach flipped. The seat was wet. Not soaked, wet. As if someone had just stood up and left moments ago. She backed away, keeping the camera trained. That's when the drone started beeping. She'd forgotten she sent it up an hour ago, set to return automatically. Its screen showed a bird's eye view of the property, and something else. A second shadow, not hers. It moved just behind her, between the trees, then vanished. She whirled around. Nothing. No footsteps. No sounds. But when she looked back at the house, the front door was shut. She didn't shut it. That was the first time Mara considered turning back, but her curiosity burned hotter than her fear. She told herself it was a squatter, or some old caretaker living off the grid, someone who didn't want to be found. She turned off the drone and pushed the door open again. This time, the house had changed. The air was warmer, thicker. The wallpaper was no longer peeling. In fact, it looked fresh, bright yellow with little blue daisies. She stepped into the kitchen, and her jaw dropped. There was food on the table, a steaming bowl of stew, a spoon resting beside it, and a second chair pulled out as if inviting her to sit. She reached forward, touched the bowl, ice cold. She lifted the spoon. Something scratched the inside of the bowl. Not metal, not ceramic. She looked closer. It was a fingernail. Mara dropped the spoon and stumbled back. The camera in her hand caught a flicker in the doorway. A shape, not a person. A dress, long, white, floating just above the ground. She spun toward it. Gone. The house was playing tricks on her, or she was losing it. Either way, she needed to ground herself. She set up camp in the living room, laid out her gear, and began documenting. She described the stew, the fingernail, the drone footage. Her voice was shaky but calm, until she heard it. A creak upstairs. She froze, reached for her flashlight. The beam caught the staircase. Dust danced in the air. She counted the steps as she climbed. 12, 13, 14. At step 15, the wood dipped under her foot, and she fell forward. But she didn't hit the floor. Something caught her. Two pale hands, wrinkled, cold. She screamed, kicked, broke free, crawled backward down the stairs until she hit the bottom. Her camera still recorded, blurry, shaking. When she reviewed the footage, there was nothing. No hands. No face. Just her scream echoing into silence. She didn't sleep that night, but the worst hadn't started yet. At 2:13 a.m., every door in the house slammed shut at once. Bing, bee, ange, then silence. Then a whisper. Mara, she held her breath. The voice came from the walls. Low, groaning, not male, not female, not human. She ran to the door, locked. She tried the windows. Nailed shut. Her flashlight flickered. Batteries dying. She grabbed her backup from the pack. Dead. All three. Her phone was at 87%, but she had no signal. Not even saw us. She tried to film, but her camera screen turned black. Not off. Black. Still on. Still powered. Just showing nothing. A void. She ran to the front of the house, shoved the door. No give. Then, behind her, soft footsteps. One after the other. She turned. There she was, the woman, hair wet and clinging to her face. Dress soaked like she'd crawled from a river. Her eyes were gone, black pits that seemed to pull the air around them. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Instead, her jaw cracked wide. Wider than it should have, dislocating with a sick pop. And then she spoke. She's still hungry. Mara blacked out. When she woke up, it was morning. The door was open. Her gear was untouched. The stew was gone. So was the chair. She bolted out of the house, ran through the forest until she reached her car, drove for 3 hours without stopping. She didn't look back once. That night, when she got home, she went straight to her editing room. She plugged in her camera. There were no files, not even corrupted ones. She checked the drone footage. Blank, but her phone had recorded something. Just one thing, a single photo. Time stamped 2:13 a.m. It showed her asleep in the living room, and behind her, the woman, smiling, with something in her hand, a fork, and something else beneath the photo. A caption she hadn't written. She didn't finish her meal, but she will, soon. Mara stared at the screen, unable to move, unable to blink. Then her doorbell rang. It was 2:13 a.m. The night after Mara escaped the house, she didn't sleep. She didn't even sit. She paced her apartment in a silent panic, eyes darting to every corner, as if something might spring out of the shadows and tear her apart. The image from her phone burned into her mind. Her, asleep, vulnerable, and that thing behind her. That woman. But calling it a woman felt like a kindness it didn't deserve. It wasn't just the empty sockets or the soaked dress. It was the smile. A quiet, slow grin that didn't show teeth, just patience. Like it was waiting. Watching. Playing with its food. She tried to erase the photo. Her finger hovered over the screen, but the phone refused. Literally, every time she tapped delete, the screen glitched, then returned to normal. Photo still there. At one point, it even blinked. The photo blinked. Her own eyes in the image opened for a split second, stared right at her, then closed again. She threw the phone into the bathtub and turned on the water. And yet, when she checked it 10 minutes later, it was dry. Working. No water damage. And the photo, still there. Her producer, James, called her the next morning. He was pissed, accusing her of ghosting during an important project and ignoring deadlines. But Mara barely heard him. She told him something had happened. Something wrong. Something she couldn't explain. James just sighed and asked if she was on something again. She'd had a scare like this before. 3 years back, in a burned-out asylum in Idaho. She'd spent 2 nights there alone and came back talking about whispers in the drains and faces behind mirrors. She was hospitalized for exhaustion then, diagnosed with temporary psychosis. But this wasn't that. This was different. Still, she needed help. Proof. Witnesses. So she posted anonymously on her fan forum. Not as Mara the Mythbuster, but as a nameless user. Just a simple post: has anyone heard of the house in the Oregon pines? No road, no signs. Just a whisper when you sleep. She's still hungry. Within minutes, replies flooded in. At first, they were jokes. Sounds like my ex. Is this a riddle? But then a private message came through. The sender's name was just DK. The message was short: you went in. She touched you. That means she's in now. Listen to your floorboards. Mara's blood ran cold. She looked down at the wooden floor of her apartment. It was old, warped in places. She pressed her ear to it. At first, just silence, then a knock, slow, deliberate, 3 raps from below. She jerked away and backed into the wall, heart thudding in her chest like a war drum. She grabbed her laptop and messaged DK again. Who are you? The reply came instantly. I used to live there. She followed me too. Mara typed furiously. What is she? What does she want? This time, the reply came slower, as if it had weight. She doesn't want anything. She just waits. You wake her, and you belong to her. Every place you step, she learns your rhythm. Every breath, she memorizes. You've already fed her once. She just needs more. Mara couldn't breathe. She hadn't fed anyone. She hadn't done anything. But then her eyes drifted to her kitchen. The instant ramen. She hadn't eaten since she came home, but she remembered cooking. Smelled it. Remembered tasting something. Something metallic, like blood. And now that she thought about it, had she even opened the packet? Or had it just been there, waiting on the stove? She grabbed the pot and checked. No wrapper in the trash. No open seasoning packet. But the pot was spotless, like it had been licked clean. Her stomach turned. Another message pinned from DK. She always starts in the kitchen. That's where they used to feed her. Listen, she's learning you. Suddenly, the light above Mara flickered. Then the floor groaned beneath her. Long and deep, as though something massive had rolled beneath the boards. She pressed her ear to it again, trembling. This time, it wasn't knocks. It was breathing. Wet, guttural, gasping, like lungs that hadn't been used in years, finally filling with stale air. Mara scrambled backward, eyes wide, whispering to herself that it couldn't be real. She had to see it again. The house. It was madness. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the longer she stayed away, the stronger it got. Like the house had imprinted on her, and now it was bleeding into her world. She packed up again, this time only the essentials. No cameras, no gear. Just a flashlight, a flask of salt water, silly, an old exorcist trick she read about, and her sister's old Bible. Not because she believed in God, but because she did. And maybe that counted for something. She didn't drive. She flew to Oregon, rented a junky car, and headed east into the forest. This time, the road was shorter, the trees thinner. She reached the clearing within an hour, and the house was waiting. Exactly the same, but somehow closer. The trees had pulled back, opening a larger space around it, as if the forest itself was giving the house room to breathe. Or grow. Mara approached. Heart in her throat, fingers clenched around the Bible. The door was open again. Inside, the house had changed. Photos now lined the walls. Not frames, just snapshots like Polaroids. Hundreds of them, all of people sleeping, some old, some new, some her. Photos of Mara curled in bed, slouched at her desk, showering, blinking, and in each one, just behind her shoulder, the same figure. Dress soaked, smile thin, empty eyes. Mara ripped one from the wall. On the back, a date, July 10, 1996, the day Clay Mercer disappeared. She grabbed more. April 2, 2003, December 31, 1971, last Thursday. Her own handwriting was scrawled beneath that one. Don't wake her. The house groaned again. This time, it was loud enough to make the floor quiver beneath her feet. The smell of copper filled the air again, and from above, faint footsteps. Not stomping, not running, rocking, back and forth. She forced herself up the stairs. At the top, a hallway stretched longer than it should have. The house wasn't that big on the outside, but this corridor twisted impossibly, doors on either side. Dozens, maybe hundreds, each with a nameplate. Names she didn't recognize, until she saw one. Mara Cambial. The door creaked open before she touched it. Inside, the room was pristine. A perfect replica of her apartment. Couch, TV, bookshelf. Even her coffee mug on the table. But every photo on the walls showed one thing: the woman. Younger, human, and slowly, image by image, she changed. Her skin sagged. Her eyes darkened. Her smile grew. And in the final photo, nothing. Just the rocking chair and a fork. That's when Mara heard it again. The voice. Not loud, not angry, just tired. Time for seconds. The closet door opened behind her. She turned. And her own face looked back. Not a mirror. Not a reflection. Her face, twisted. Wrong. Lips too wide. Skin too smooth. And the eyes, black, endless. It opened its mouth. Soon it said in her voice. Then it lunged. Mara screamed and slammed the door shut behind her, bolting back down the hallway, tripping over names she didn't have time to read. The walls closed in, the light flickered, and behind her something moved like water, sloshing, crawling, laughing. She made it down the stairs and out the door just as it slammed behind her. The forest was silent. The house stood still. But when she looked back one last time, the windows weren't blacked out anymore. They were filled with faces. Every person who'd ever entered, staring out, and in the very center, smiling like it had waited forever, was Mara. Mara ran. Not just from the house, but from everything. The faces in the windows still burned in her memory, every expression twisted into that same eerie grin, eyes sunken like they'd long forgotten what light looked like. But what broke her the most was her own face, dead center in the house, grinning back at her like it had always belonged there, like she was the one who never left. She didn't stop running until her lungs screamed, and the mud sucked the soles of her boots clean off. Her legs gave out on the side of the road, barely 3 miles from the forest's edge. Somehow, a passing logging truck spotted her, mud-covered, shaking, babbling about a house that fed on memory, and the driver, an older man named Russ, offered to drive her into town. He didn't ask too many questions, just handed her a thermos of bitter black coffee and muttered, "You saw her, didn't you?" Mara's eyes snapped to him. "What did you say?" Russ didn't look at her. He just stared at the road, knuckles white on the wheel. "I hauled timber near that stretch back in '81. Heard things at night, whispers. Babies crying. I thought it was the wind until I saw the dogs. They wouldn't go near the tree line, just stood there, growling, foaming. One bit clean through its own leash, trying to back away. He glanced at her, then back at the road. "You're lucky you got out." "Out," she whispered. "I don't think I ever left." He didn't respond after that. Just dropped her off at the edge of a town called Whitlow's Hollow, a ghostly little place that looked like it had been forgotten by time. 2 diners, 1 gas station, and a church with broken, stained glass. Mara found the only motel in sight, checked into a room that smelled like mildew and mothballs, and locked the door behind her. That night, she tried to sleep, and that's when the sound returned. Not from beneath the floor, not from the walls. This time, it came from inside her. She lay on the bed, eyes open, heart thudding, when a sharp, sudden crack echoed in her ear. Like wood splintering in the middle of her skull, she sat up gasping. Then it came again. Crack. Groan. Like the beams of the house were shifting, bending under weight. But she wasn't there. She wasn't anywhere near it. She checked her phone. No calls. No texts. But one new voice message had appeared. No number. Just static as the caller ID. Her thumb hovered over play. She pressed it. For the first few seconds, there was nothing. Then came a low humming. A lullaby off key, like someone was humming through broken teeth. Then a whisper. "Do you hear it yet? You brought her with you." Mara dropped the phone. The message kept playing. The humming grew louder. She covered her ears, but the sound didn't stop. It wasn't coming from the phone anymore. It was coming from the mirror. She looked up slowly. There she was, behind her. The soaked dress, the empty eyes, the smile. But this time, she wasn't looking at Mara. She was mouthing something to her reflection. Mara watched in horror as her mirror, self-tilted its head, smiled, then nodded once, as if accepting something, making a deal, and the whisper came again from everywhere at once. Soon. She smashed the mirror with a lamp. It shattered instantly, shards clattering to the tile floor, some slicing her palms. Blood mixed with dirt, the same foul-smelling muck from the house. But the glass didn't reflect the motel room anymore. It showed the rocking chair, still moving, still empty, and a shadow just behind it, crawling toward the camera. Mara screamed and ripped the curtains down, wrapped herself in them, shaking, muttering, trying to convince herself it was a hallucination, a nightmare bleeding into her waking life. But deep down, she knew the truth. She'd never fully left that house. Part of her was still inside, and something from that place, her, had latched onto her like a tick, feeding, growing, becoming. The next morning, Mara went to the local library, desperate for answers. The librarian, an elderly woman with clouded eyes, didn't even ask what she was looking for. She just pointed her to the basement. "They all look down there eventually," she said. "That's where the town keeps the old files, and the names." Mara didn't understand, but she went. The basement was musty, lit by a single flickering bulb. Filing cabinets lined the walls, their drawers half open, papers spilling out like the place had been ransacked. She began digging through them. Property deeds, census logs, old news clippings. That's when she found it. A thin folder marked ECHO Housey. No address, no owner listed. Inside, a single photo. The house, perfectly intact, taken from a distance. In the bottom corner, a handwritten note, "Don't feed the floor. It remembers who you are." Mara flipped the photo. A name was scrawled on the back. Delilah Crane, she gasped. That was her grandmother's name. Heart pounding, she dug deeper. Found an obituary from 1962. Delilah Ann Crane, local nurse, missing from her home, presumed dead. Last seen near Whitlow's Hollow. Another article, 1971. Young girl vanishes in same stretch of forest. Mother claims house appeared out of nowhere. Authorities find no structure. Then another, 1996. Clay Mercer, forestry surveyor, last seen near mile marker 72. His truck found parked at the edge of the woods, door open, engine running. Mara's hands trembled as she pieced it together. This wasn't just some random haunting. This was blood, a pattern that ran through her family, one that spanned decades. The house didn't appear to everyone. It called. It waited until the right person came close, then wrapped itself around them like a cocoon. And once you stepped through its door, it knew you. Your thoughts, your scent, your future. She thought of the photo. Her reflection, smiling, had it already decided. Suddenly, something shifted behind her. She turned. The shadows in the far corner of the basement twisted, coalesced, became her. Again, Mara, but not Mara. Hair damp, smile wrong, eyes nothing. The double stepped forward, and when it spoke, it used her voice. You're just a crack in the floor now. She's already started. Mara stumbled back, tripped over a chair, and hit her head on the floor. Her vision swam, and in that moment between consciousness and sleep, she saw them. All of them. Every soul who had ever entered the house. Screaming, clawing, frozen behind glass, forever trapped in windows that no longer looked outside, but in. Staring out at the world they could never touch again, feeding her, keeping her full. And at the center, Delilah, her face blank, eyes begging, mouth sewn shut. Mara awoke, screaming in the hospital. The nurse said she'd been found unconscious in the library basement. Blood running from her nose, eyes wide open and unblinking. She had no memory of how she got to the hospital. No memory of calling for help. But in her coat pocket was a single piece of paper. On it, a sentence scrawled in her grandmother's handwriting. Break the hunger, or become the next course, and beneath that a new address, not the house, something else. A name Mara had never seen before, but she knew she had to go, because the hunger was spreading, and now it was calling others. Mara didn't remember falling asleep in the hospital, but when she woke, it was dark. The room was cold, too cold for a building, filled with people and humming machines. Her skin prickled with the kind of chill that doesn't come from temperature, but from something deeper. Like her body knew something was wrong before her mind caught up. The first thing she noticed was the silence. No beeping monitors, no shuffling footsteps outside the door, just absolute, suffocating quiet. She sat up slowly, the paper in her coat pocket. It was still there. She unfolded it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was unmistakably her grandmother's. She'd only seen it in childhood, on yellowed birthday cards and scribbled recipes. That looped L, the slash through the 7. There was no denying it, but Delilah Crane had died before Mara turned 10, or so she'd been told. The address was simple. 327 Candle Lane. No city, no zip, nothing else. Candle Lane didn't exist in Whitlow's Hollow. She'd checked the town map. But something about it pulled at her, like a hook in her chest. She had to find it. She left the hospital in a daze. No one stopped her. In fact, no one even seemed to be there. The hallways were empty, the lobby unmanned. Every room she passed was dark. It was like the building had died while she slept. Outside, fog blanketed the street. The town was silent. No lights in windows, no headlights on roads. It felt like the whole place had paused. Like time itself was holding its breath. Her rental car was parked exactly where she'd left it. She climbed in and typed 327 Candle Lane into her GPS, not expecting anything. The route calculated instantly. No location not found. No error. Just a single line on the map, glowing faintly red with an ETA of 14 minutes. Mara's breath hitched. She didn't question it. She just started driving. The roads twisted through the trees like veins under pale skin. The GPS line pulsed as she moved, like it was alive, leading her into the heart of something old. The deeper she drove, the more the forest changed. The trees grew closer together. Their trunks bent toward the road, branches twisting like fingers clutching at the sky. Even her headlights felt dimmer, swallowed by the dark. Then, without warning, the trees parted, and there it was. A narrow dirt road, a rusted sign barely hanging from one nail. Candle Lane. The letters were scorched, the wood beneath them blackened as if it had once burned. She followed the path. The road narrowed until it was barely wider than the car. Vines dragged across the windshield. Something scratched along the undercarriage. Claws or roots, she couldn't tell. She held her breath the entire time, heart hammering in her chest. But the car kept moving, like something wanted her to arrive. At the end of the lane stood a house. Not the house. This one was older, smaller. No porch. No rocking chair, no windows at all. Just a single black door and 4 thick beams holding the roof. It looked like a mausoleum. Or a cage. Mara stepped out, flashlight in hand. The moment her foot touched the ground, she felt it. A vibration. Faint, but steady. Like a heartbeat beneath the earth. The same rhythm she'd heard under her floorboards in the motel. The same one she'd felt in her chest since she left the original house. She approached the door. No knob. Just a rusted handle. Like something meant to be pulled. Her hand closed around it before she could think. The door opened on its own. Inside, the air was thick, wet, choking, metallic. The walls were made of stone, carved with symbols she didn't recognize. But she knew them. Somewhere deep in her bones, they felt familiar. One wall was covered in photos, much like the ones in the original house. Only these were older, black and white. Women, all with the same wide, empty smile, all staring directly into the lens. In the center of the room was a well, old, lined with moss. It reeked of rot and rust. But it wasn't empty. A rope hung down into the darkness. Attached to it was a bucket, and inside the bucket was a doll. Not a cute one, not store-bought. This one was handmade, stitched together from skin-colored fabric, with button eyes and a mouth sewn shut with thread that looked too dark to be yarn. Mara didn't want to touch it. But something inside her whispered, "Pick it up." Her fingers moved against her will. The moment she touched it, her vision snapped away from the room. She was in the house again. Not physically, but her mind, her senses, everything she was, now stood inside those warped wooden walls. Except this time, she wasn't her. She was the woman. Delilah. She stood at the kitchen sink, hands covered in blood. Something twitched in the sink basin. A rabbit, or what was left of one. She turned and Mara saw through her eyes, saw the house in its prime. Bright, clean, safe, a home. But there was something wrong. She heard it upstairs. The crying. She walked toward the sound. Her hands trembled, each step heavier than the last. When she reached the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched impossibly long, just like it had for Mara. But this time, Delilah wasn't afraid. She was angry. She reached the final door and opened it. Inside was a crib, and above it, floating was her. The real her, the one with the soaked dress and empty eyes. But she wasn't complete yet. She was just forming. A shape, a spirit, a hunger, and Delilah screamed. The vision snapped. Mara fell backward, the doll still clutched in her hands. Her head slammed into the floor, and from the well, a voice hissed, "She gave me life to silence a child." Mara scrambled to her feet. The voice slithered out from the well like a snake. Cold, amused. "Delilah tried to feed me scraps," it whispered. "But you are a full course meal." Mara dropped the doll. The voice laughed. "The hunger must pass, or it will grow. You carry it now." The walls of the small house began to close in. Literally, the stones groaned, pushed inward. Dust fell from the ceiling. The room began to fold into itself like paper. Mara turned, grabbed the door. It was gone. There was no way out. The well cracked. A hand slipped out, pale, water-logged, fingers like bone. Then another. The doll on the ground twitched. Mara screamed and kicked it into the well, and for a moment, everything stopped. The hands pulled back. The well groaned shut, and the room grew still. Then the voice returned. "You fed me again. But this was not yours to give." Mara was thrown out, back into the forest, onto her back, gasping for air. The house behind her was gone. No sign of the road, no sign of Candle Lane, just dirt, trees, and sky. But in her hand was the doll, now stitched with her name across the chest. She didn't run this time. She just sat there and cried. Because she finally understood. The hunger never stops. It only waits. Mara didn't return to the motel. She couldn't. Not because she didn't want to, because it wasn't there anymore. Where Whitlow's Hollow once stood was nothing but ash and mist. As she stumbled back along the cracked road, still clutching the stitched doll, she found only scorched grass and caved foundations. The town had been wiped clean, like someone had pressed delete on reality and left nothing behind but smoke and silence. There was no sign of Russ, no hospital, no people. The streetlights stood crooked, flickering above nothing. Even her rental car was gone, and the air tasted faintly of sulfur and rust, like a fire long since burned out. Somewhere, far off in the pines, a church bell rang. But there were no churches left. Mara walked, each step heavier than the last, like gravity was thickening around her. The forest didn't feel like a place anymore. It felt like a body, breathing, watching, waiting for her to fall again so it could swallow her whole. And she could feel the hunger inside her now, not as a metaphor, not as fear, but as a physical thing. A gnawing, coiling weight in her chest, like something had built a nest in her rib cage and was waiting for its time to crack open. Her hands shook with every heartbeat. The doll in her palm twitched once, just a jerk of the limbs like a puppet tugged by an invisible string. She threw it, hard, into the woods. It landed with a soft thud. Then, instantly, it was back in her hand, warm, smiling. She screamed. The echo bounced through the trees, but the forest didn't answer. It just listened. Then the path changed beneath her feet. She didn't see it at first. It wasn't sudden, more like subtle shifts. The dirt under her boots began to harden. The soft pine needles vanished. The sound of her steps changed, muffled thumps replaced by gentle creaks. Until she looked down and realized she was no longer walking on forest floor. She was walking on floorboards. She froze. The trees were gone. In every direction, dark wooden walls now rose like ribs around her, stretching out into shadow. The air thickened. A ceiling pressed down above her. She turned in a slow circle. She was inside a room. No doors, no windows, no seams, just wood, endless wood. And in the center, the chair, the rocking chair, empty, perfectly still, but waiting. She backed up, only to hear a new sound. A soft click behind her. She turned. A door, not a front door, a bedroom door. Her bedroom door. She opened it. Inside was a perfect copy of her apartment, down to the smallest detail. Same scuff on the coffee table, same dying houseplant in the corner. Even her clothes hung neatly in the closet. But the air was wrong. It was thick with something old, something wet. She stepped in, her body moving before her mind caught up. On the coffee table sat a steaming bowl of ramen, just like before, a fork resting beside it. But this time, she could see something beneath the surface. Not a fingernail, not hair, a tooth. She dropped the bowl, and it shattered against the floor, but instead of noodles, the liquid that spilled was black. Not dark, not murky, black, like ink, like void. It oozed toward her feet, and the moment it touched her boots, it hissed. Mara ran. She bolted through the door, but the hallway had changed. Gone was her apartment. Now it stretched long and narrow, lit by flickering overhead lights, hospital lights, and at the far end she saw a woman, white gown, damp hair, standing perfectly still. The woman didn't move, but the lights behind her began to go out. Click, 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 one by one, moving closer. Mara didn't think. She sprinted the other way, the doll now clutched tight against her chest, whether she liked it or not. The hallway twisted, spiraled, dropped into itself, steps forming out of the floor, as if built with every panic breath she took. She burst through another door. Now she was in a church. Not a real one. A decayed replica. Stained glass windows showed her, not Jesus, not saints, Mara, over and over. In one window she was screaming. In another she was clawing at the walls. In the last, she stood beside the woman in white, smiling with her mouth stitched shut. She looked at the altar. The doll sat there, now grown large, child-sized, almost human. Its button eyes followed her. A voice whispered from behind the pews. "You should have left it in the woods." She spun around. A man emerged from the shadows. Barefoot, eyes bloodshot, covered in scratches and dirt, he held something in his hands, a photo. He handed it to her without a word. It showed Mara, lying in a hospital bed. But she wasn't alone. The woman in white stood beside her, hand on her shoulder, and Mara was smiling. "Who are you?" Mara asked, her voice cracking. The man tilted his head. "She was in me once too. Long time ago. Thought I escaped. Changed my name. Moved states. Got a wife. A life. But the rooms kept showing up. She built one in my attic. Then the basement. Then my mind." He took a step closer. "She doesn't kill. That's not what she wants. She builds. Room by room. Memory by memory. Until you forget where the real world ends and her world begins." Mara looked around. The church. The apartment. The woods. All of them. Rooms. "She's building me." The man nodded. "You're the foundation." Mara dropped the photo. Her skin burned. Her blood felt thick, slow. Her thoughts no longer felt her own. The doll in her hands was heavier now. Its eyes had changed. They were hers. She turned to run again. But the door behind her was gone. Only walls now pulsing. Breathing. And then the voice returned, not from the man, not from the doll, but from the walls themselves. "You've made enough rooms, Mara. It's time to live in them." The church windows shattered inward, glass slicing her face, her arms, her legs. But there was no blood, only water, thick black water. It poured in, filled her mouth, her ears, her mind. And from beneath it all, she heard rocking. Back, and forth, and back, and the whisper, "Soon they'll knock, and you'll open the door." Mara screamed, but no sound came out. She was part of the house now, and it was still building. Mara awoke gasping, soaked in black water that vanished the moment she sat up, as if it had never been there at all. Her lungs burned, her throat raw, but she was alive. Breathing. Awake. Or at least, that's what she told herself, even though the floor beneath her still creaked like it belonged to something else. She sat in silence, staring at the walls that boxed her in. This room, this new room, was small. Too small. No windows, no furniture, no visible door. Just four walls, a ceiling, and the persistent, muffled sound of rocking from somewhere beyond. It wasn't just noise, it had rhythm. And rhythm meant intention. Something was choosing to make that sound, to pace it just slowly enough that it wouldn't drive her mad, but wouldn't let her forget it either. Rock pause. Rock pause. Like a pendulum counting down time she no longer had. She stood and walked to the nearest wall, slapping her palms against it, feeling for seams, weaknesses, anything. It was warm, that was wrong. Wood wasn't supposed to pulse beneath your fingers like it had a heartbeat. She backed away, heart hammering. The walls began to tighten, not physically, but mentally, spiritually. The room felt smaller, like it was moving in with her every breath, stealing space molecule by molecule. And then something worse happened. She remembered the smell of her mother's perfume. It came out of nowhere. Not just a phantom scent, the scent. Lavender and rain, a perfect match. It filled the room without warning, without mercy. It dragged Mara back to a memory she hadn't touched since she was 12. Her mother's bedroom. The soft click of heels, and the distant humming of a lullaby. The same lullaby she'd heard whispered in the voice message. The same one the woman in white mouthed in her dream. Mara collapsed to her knees. This place wasn't just copying her life anymore, it was inhabiting it. It was crawling into her memories, her regrets, her secrets. Every fear she'd buried, every moment she'd ignored, was now becoming architecture. And the house. It wasn't a place. It was her. Suddenly, the sound changed. The rocking stopped. Something shuffled outside the wall, clawed at it. Slowly a shape began to form, pressing through the wood, not from behind it, but within. As if the wall was a membrane and the thing beyond was being born through it. A face stretched forward, no features, just smooth flesh. It pushed and pushed, until it was inches from Mara's frozen face. And then it whispered, "They're coming to visit." The wall snapped back like rubber, erasing the shape. The rocking resumed, only now faster. Urgent, hungry, the air thinned. Mara stumbled back, clutching her head. Her thoughts weren't safe. She couldn't even think clearly without it listening. The walls were ears now. Every sob, every desperate breath, fed the thing that lived behind them. Then, a knock. Not loud, not panicked, polite. 1, 2, 3 knocks. Mara's body locked up. There was no door, but something had still knocked. Another pause. Another set of 3 knocks. And then, words etched themselves into the wall in front of her, carved slowly, as if by an invisible hand. Lit ttmamn. No, she breathed. No, I won't. The wall responded with a second message, carved below the first, youaleadd. She backed into the corner, eyes darting, heart pounding so hard it felt like her skull would split. The knocks came again, louder now. Boom, boom, boom. The wood buckled, the room shook, and then behind her a sound. A soft laugh. She turned. A child sat cross-legged on the floor. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7. Pale skin. Long, damp hair. Not the woman, not yet, but something on the way there. Her eyes were large, too large, and her mouth was stitched shut with thick black thread. But somehow Mara could still hear her voice. Not out loud. Inside her. "You're the last," the girl said, without moving her lips. "Once your room is done, she wakes fully." Mara fell back against the wall. What does she want? To live. To walk. To eat without hiding. She's always been starving. Delilah couldn't keep her full. None of them could. But you, the girl tilted her head. You've made so many rooms. The doll appeared in the girl's lap. Its mouth was now open. The threads lay at its feet. She wants to speak now. Mara screamed. The walls exploded outward. Not shattered, peeled. Like the inside of her mind was being stripped away, and what lay beneath was wood, and nails and dark corridors stretching endlessly into her memories. She found herself in a hallway again. But not the house this time. The hospital, white tile, fluorescent lights, her own name echoing from an intercom overhead. "Dr. Kimball, room 4. Dr. Kimball, room 4. Her father's voice. He'd been a surgeon, cold. Brilliant, unreachable. Mara remembered standing outside this very hallway as a child, peeking in. Her father never waved, never smiled, but now he did. She saw him at the end of the hallway, standing in scrubs soaked with blood, holding a scalpel, smiling a smile she'd never seen on his real face. Too wide, too wrong. "Time to cut it out," he said. Mara ran the other way. The hallway twisted, turned red. Lights flickered. Alarms blared. The world tilted, and the floor fell away, plunging her into darkness. She landed in her childhood bedroom, exactly as it was when she was 8. Even the stuffed bear she lost in the fire sat perfectly on the bed. She picked it up. It blinked. "I missed you," it said in her voice. She dropped it, screamed. The window lit up. A knock came at the glass. She looked. Her mother stood outside, skin peeling, eyes crying blood, mouth whispering the same lullaby. "Sleep, little soul, sleep in the fire." Mara fell to her knees. "Please," she begged, "please stop." But the walls didn't stop. The walls never stopped. They only built. One by one, new rooms appeared behind her. Her high school hallway, her college dorm, the alley where she saw a man die in front of her and told no one. Every sin, every grief, every loss, rooms, and in every room her, the woman. Older now, her dress darker, her body more solid. She was becoming real. "You're building her a body," the child whispered, now beside her again. "And when the last nail is in, she'll open the door from inside you." Mara tried to scream again, but no sound came. The last wall rose, the last room built, and inside that room was a door, her front door. From her real apartment, someone knocked. 3 times. Then the handle turned, and Mara finally understood. There was no escaping the house, because she was the house, and she had just let herself in. She didn't want to see what was on the other side. Mara stood frozen, her breath tight in her lungs. the doorknob twisting in slow motion before her. It was the exact same brass handle from her apartment back home, same scratches, same looseness where it had wobbled for years. She hadn't turned it. No one had. But it moved anyway, as if the house had memorized her gestures, her routines. Down to the subtle way she always opened the door with her left hand and braced with her shoulder. It was all too real. Too intimate. And that's when it hit her. The house didn't just know her memories. It knew her habits, her patterns, her timing, how she blinked, how she hesitated before stepping into the shower, how long she stared at her phone screen before sleep took her. It was inside the rhythm of her life, and now it was using that rhythm to rebuild her from the inside out. The door creaked open. At first, nothing but a black void lay beyond it. But then, slowly, the light came. Not a glow, not a flood, a flicker, like a film reel rolling to life, and projected on that darkness Mara saw herself, walking, talking, living, doing things she hadn't done in years, laughing with her mother, eating dinner with her father, sitting in bed with a man she'd once loved before betrayal split them, apart like dry wood. She watched her past like a ghost at the edge of its own grave. Then the film changed, the images sped up, they blurred, her face aged, warped, then twisted. She was no longer Mara, she was her. The woman in the white dress, the one she'd seen in mirrors, in wells, in rooms she hadn't built. And now she was smiling wide on screen, waving slowly. Not at the camera, at her. Mara slammed the door shut. The knock returned instantly. 3 sharp, clean knocks. Perfectly spaced, like a metronome for something ancient. Then a voice whispered through the wood, a voice that sounded just like hers. "Let me in, you're tired. I can carry you now." Mara staggered back, her thoughts spiraling. She had no idea how long she'd been inside this place. It didn't obey time. It didn't obey space. And now she feared it didn't obey identity either. Every second, it was sculpting her into something else. Into her successor, not by force, not by possession, by familiarity. It made her feel like it knew her so intimately. She was starting to forget who she'd been. And maybe that was the point. Mara turned from the door, searching for escape. But the hallway behind her was gone. Now, the room stretched into something new. A gallery. And on the walls were dozens of paintings. Each one of her. But not her now. Her through the years. As a teenager in braces. As a child on a tricycle. As a baby in a hospital incubator. She moved down the line. The last painting was blank. Wet paint dripped from the bottom edge. And below it, on a small gold plate, were the words "Portrait to be completed upon full surrender." Her knees went weak. She collapsed beneath it. The room dimmed. Then footsteps echoed through the gallery. Slow. Measured. She looked up and saw a man emerge from the shadows. His eyes were sunken. His skin tight across his skull. He walked like someone moving through water, each step resistant, heavy. He didn't speak, not yet. Just stared down at her. Then he extended his hand. In his palm was a small object. A key. It was old, rusted, the head shaped like an eye. Mara didn't take it. She just stared. "Is this a trick?" she asked, voice hoarse. He shook his head. "You want out. This is the only way. One last door. But you can't run from her. You know that now. Who are you?" He gave a faint smile. "The one who came before." Mara's throat went dry. "Before what?" He placed the key on the floor and stepped back. "You'll find out. If you use it. But be careful. Doors that open also invite." Then he vanished. Literally. No fade. No blur. One blink and he was gone. Mara stared at the key for a long time. The room pulsed around her like a heartbeat. She picked it up. It burned her skin, but she held on. The gallery twisted into a hallway again, and at the far end stood a new door. Jet black. Carved into it, in her own handwriting, were the words "Final Room." She approached it slowly. Every step made the key hotter in her palm, but she didn't drop it. When she reached the door, she hesitated. Not because of fear, but because she wasn't sure what part of her was hesitating. Was it the real Mara, or the reflection? She inserted the key, turned it, the door opened, and what she saw made her wish she'd never asked for escape, because there was no grand finale waiting on the other side, just a mirror, floor to ceiling, and in the reflection stood two Maras, identical. One bloodied and bruised, trembling in fear. The other smiling, pristine, eyes full of hunger. The smiling one stepped forward from the glass and said, "You made me so well. Now let me live." Mara backed away. The mirror shattered. Glass flew everywhere, slicing her arms, her legs. But what stepped through the broken frame wasn't her. It was the woman. Fully formed now, real, alive. And she looked at Mara with a mother's love and a predator's calm. Then she said, "Rest now. Let the house breathe through you. Let the next one in." And she handed Mara the doll, now stitched with a new name across the chest. One Mara had never seen, but someone else would. Eventually. Because the house wasn't done. It never would be. It was always looking for the next room, the next heartbeat, the next soul to build. And now, Mara was the one holding the hammer. Mara stared at the name stitched across the doll's chest, heart cracking like glass beneath ice. It wasn't her name anymore. The letters had been rearranged, reformed into something new, something foreign. Nora Wells. She didn't know that name, not consciously, but it hummed with familiarity in her bones, as if spoken long ago in some forgotten dream. The doll's eyes were no longer buttons. They were glass now, human-shaped, staring right at her, reflecting her face. No, not her face. The other one's. The one she had become, or was still becoming. Mara couldn't tell anymore where she ended and the woman began. Every time she blinked, it felt like waking into a body she didn't recognize. The house hadn't just trapped her. It had rewritten her, carving her into the walls, bleeding her into the grain of its floorboards. And now it wanted her to carry the torch, to pass the hunger forward like some sick heirloom. But something was wrong, because for the first time since stepping into this endless, breathing nightmare, she wasn't alone. There was another knock, not polite, not patient, furious, desperate. 3 rapid pounds against the wall, not the door. From the other side of the wood, someone was trying to break in. Mara stood, doll in hand, heart thrumming with something she hadn't felt in days. Uncertainty. This wasn't part of the rhythm. This wasn't the calculated metronome the house kept. This knock didn't belong, which meant someone else was breaking the rules. The wall cracked, just a hairline fracture, but enough to let in a sliver of light, real light, sunlight. Mara stepped toward it, cautious, ready to pull back if the house reacted. But nothing came. No voice, no whisper, no shifting corridors. The house waited, watching. Another crack, then a voice, faint. "Young, is someone in there?" Mara's breath hitched. It was a girl, sounding no older than 10. "Please," the voice said. "I keep seeing you in my dreams. I think you're me." The wall split wider, a jagged seam of glowing white tearing through the darkness. Through it, Mara saw flashes, images of a small bedroom, a child's nightlight in the shape of a moon, drawings taped to pink walls, a world outside. Reality. The girl knocked again. "Your name's Mara, right?" Mara didn't answer. She couldn't. Something inside her wanted to respond, to shout, to scream through the crack and beg for rescue. But the hunger inside her pulled tight, like a leash, because if this girl was reaching in, then the house had already found its next room. The doll shifted in her hand. The name, Nora Wells, glowed faintly, its thread turning from black to red. Mara dropped it. It stood up on its own. The house moaned. Wood groaned. Nails twisted. The floor buckled. It didn't want to let Mara go. But something was pushing from the other side. Not a child, not a person. A force. Pure and bright and angry. Something that did not belong to the rhythm of the house. A voice that had learned not to knock, but to break. Mara lunged forward and jammed her fingers into the crack. The wall was flesh, warm, breathing. She clawed at it anyway, feeling splinters tear through her skin. Blood soaked the wall. It hissed. Behind her, the woman screamed. Not with fear. With rage. The final stage was unraveling too early. Mara was supposed to surrender. Let the girl in. Build a new wing of the house around her soul. Instead, she was tearing the house apart from the inside. The mirror behind her shattered. Every version of her face splintered into dust. The doll ignited, consumed in blue flame without burning anything else. Then the wall exploded, and light, real light, flooded the room. Mara fell through it, tumbling out into grass, into sunlight, into birdsong and breeze. She choked on clean air, blinked up into blue sky, and standing over her was the girl, brown curls, moon-shaped eyes, a band-aid on her cheek, and a trembling in her hands like she'd held back a monster and was now realizing it. "I knew you were real," the girl whispered. "You're me from before, aren't you?" Mara sat up slowly. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. "Not quite, but close enough. Why do I keep dreaming about that place?" "Because it's trying to make you the next." The girl frowned. "The next what?" Mara looked back. The house was gone. No wreckage. No footprint. Just a ring of scorched grass and a faint smell of lavender. "I don't know," Mara said, "but it won't stop. Not on its own." The girl, Nora, looked down. "Then what do we do?" Mara smiled. Not because she was safe. Not because it was over. But because, for the first time, she wasn't fighting alone. "We break its rhythm." The wind shifted. Far off, a creak. Not from a house. From beneath the ground. The hunger wasn't gone. Just quiet. Waiting. But it had underestimated something. Mara was no longer just a room. She was the exit. And the girl beside her. She wasn't a door waiting to be opened. She was the lock. The grass was soft beneath Mara's palms, but her nerves twitched with every blade she touched. It was too calm. The sky too open. The silence too absolute. There was no trace of the house. No sign that it had ever existed beyond the scorched ring, where the ground looked like it had been whispered into ash. The trees surrounding the clearing stood still, as if holding their breath. Nora stayed close, fingers brushing Mara's sleeve, her young face tight with questions she didn't yet know how to form. And Mara, she didn't have the answers, only the weight of something ancient pressing between her shoulder blades, a cold awareness that the house wasn't done with her. Or Nora. It never stopped. It only shifted. She could feel it in the wind. Not a sound. A presence. Like a voice on the tip of a breath, waiting for the next name to fall into its rhythm. The last syllables of Mara Kimball had already dried into the floorboards. Now the hunger was learning how to say Nora Wells. "I keep seeing her in my sleep," Nora said suddenly, voice hushed. The woman with the wet dress. "She's always rocking, always humming." Mara flinched. She didn't want to hear the lullaby again. Not even the words. Not even a whisper of it. "Sometimes she talks to me," Nora added, "but not with her mouth. I don't think she knows how to speak anymore. It's like she makes you hear things in your bones instead." Mara turned to the girl, gripping her arms gently. "If she ever asks you to open something, don't. I don't care if it's a window, a drawer, your own hand. Don't open it." Nora blinked. She already asked me to open my eyes. Mara's stomach sank. Were they closed in the dream? I think so. But when I opened them, everything changed. The house wasn't a house anymore. It was a maze. And she was everywhere. But she wasn't walking. Then how was she moving? Nora looked away. She was part of the walls. The words punched through Mara's chest. That was the truth, wasn't it? The woman, whatever she once had been, was no longer a ghost or a person. She was a structure, a pattern. She built herself into the world through repetition, memory, rhythm. She whispered in rocking chairs, in lullabies, in the creaks of floorboards passed from mother to daughter, from grandmother to granddaughter. The hunger didn't chase. It waited. It inherited. Mara stood and scanned the forest edge. There was no road. No tire tracks. The clearing existed in a bubble, untouched by time, unseen by the rest of the world. But that wouldn't last. Somewhere, someone else would stumble near. And if Nora could find this place, then the house could find others too. We can't stay here, Mara said. We need to move. To where? Anywhere but here. They started walking, no destination in mind, only the instinct to put as much distance as possible between them and the silence that used to be a house. But distance didn't matter. Not really. It never had. You could be 100 miles away, and the rhythm would still reach you if it had your name. That's what terrified Mara now. Nora's name had already been spoken in that place, even if only as a whisper. They moved through the trees for what felt like hours. The sun barely shifted. Time stretched thin, the sky too pale. Eventually, they came across a rotting billboard, half swallowed by vines, its paint long faded but still legible beneath the decay. Nuchi SPR Pines KMGRUND. Family memories that last forever. Mara almost laughed. The irony was too cruel. Memories that last forever. They walked past it, and soon a cracked gravel path opened before them. A ghost of a road, abandoned but real. Human. The kind of thing built by people with hammers, not whispers. They followed it until the trees thinned and a ranger's outpost appeared. Half collapsed, weathered by years of storm and neglect. But it had walls, a roof, a lockable door, and no scent of her. Not yet. They holed up there as dusk crept across the treetops. Mara found a rusted lantern and lit it. The flickering glow felt fragile, like the smallest breath could extinguish it. Nora curled on a cot, eyes wide open. She didn't speak, just watched Mara, with that quiet intensity only children possessed when they'd seen something they weren't supposed to. Mara didn't sleep either. She sat by the window, listening, and eventually she heard it. Not loud, not even deliberate, just a faint creak, not from the building, from within her. Her bones. 1, 2, pause. 1, 2, pause. Her body had picked up the house's rhythm, and she wasn't sure she could ever unlearn it. Her hand moved without permission, reaching into her coat pocket. The doll was back. Whole. Its glass eyes gleamed in the lantern's light, the name Nora Wells stitched darker than before. She should have thrown it into the fire. Instead, she stared at it, then turned it over. On the back, for the first time, was another line of thread, new, a date, October 6th, tomorrow. Mara's breath caught. The hunger had a schedule now, and the next room was set to be built. She dropped the doll, stood, and moved to Nora's cot, shook her gently. We have to go. Now. Nora blinked awake. What? They're coming tomorrow? I don't know how, but the house, it's marked a day. We can't wait for it. But where do we go? I don't know. Mara paused. Then, you said she asked you to open your eyes. What did she look like then? Nora shivered. Like me. The floor groaned. Not the building's floor. The earth beneath it. Mara ran to the window. The trees were shifting, not blowing in wind, turning, leaning, like they were listening, following. She grabbed Nora's hand. Run! They bolted into the night. And somewhere behind them, deep beneath the soil, the sound began again. Rock pause. Rock pause. The house wasn't gone. It was just rebuilding. And this time, it was using her body as blueprints. They ran until the trees blurred, until breath burned and limbs numbed, until Mara could no longer tell if the sound behind them was leaves shifting or the creak of rocking wood bleeding from her memory into the world around her. Nora gripped her hand tightly, keeping pace without complaint. Her small face set with the kind of fear that didn't shout or cry. It knew. This was no game. No nightmare to be shaken off in the morning. What was after them didn't chase in the usual way. It waited, not behind, but ahead. At the end of choices not yet made. At the edge of sleep they hadn't taken yet. In the words they hadn't spoken aloud. The house, in all its impossible hunger, had already seen this moment. They reached a dry riverbed, the moon casting a pale ribbon over the cracked mud. Mara dropped to her knees, gasping, scanning the sky. No drones, no planes, no satellites. It was as if the world itself had taken a step back. leaving her and Nora in some bubble outside of time, where only she was watching. The woman, the hunger, the thing that had become more than a ghost. It wasn't haunting Mara anymore. It was inhabiting her. Ever since she escaped that final door, something had changed. Not just in her thoughts, but in her skin. She could feel it, like extra muscle beneath her bones, a second rhythm echoing behind her heartbeat. Sometimes her fingers twitched without reason. Sometimes the shadows bent toward her when she passed. And when she closed her eyes, she could see blueprints. Lines and angles and shapes forming walls around people she hadn't even met. She wasn't just remembering the house. She was designing it. "Do you hear that?" Nora whispered beside her. Mara listened. Wind, crickets, then something else. Knocking, not loud, not near. But it was there. Faint, like it was traveling up from the core of the earth. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks again. It came from beneath the dry bed of the river. Mara grabbed Nora's hand again and stood, swallowing the bile that rose in her throat. "We have to keep moving." They climbed out of the riverbed and followed the stars, using only instinct and fear to guide them. They didn't speak much. Words felt too heavy, too real. Any sentence spoken aloud might be heard by her, might become a part of the rhythm. And Mara had learned something vital in that maze of memories the house called home. The hunger lived off repetition. A lullaby, a knock, a room, a name. If something happened 3 times in a row, it became a foundation. The 4th time was the wall, the 5th, the roof, the 6th. That's when she walked in. They camped in an abandoned rest stop sometime just before dawn. A shattered vending machine provided Nora with half a melted candy bar and Mara with a bottle of water so old the plastic cap disintegrated in her hand. They didn't care. Hunger was better than her kind of fullness. As they settled under a torn map of Oregon, duct taped to the interior wall, Mara saw it again. The name, Nora Wells. It had been scribbled in ballpoint pen in the lower left corner like graffiti, but the ink was fresh, still wet. Mara wiped it away with her sleeve. Beneath it was another line. "She's already standing behind her." Mara turned. Nothing. Just Nora. Curled up, eyes wide, staring back. But her mouth trembled. "I didn't say anything," Nora whispered, before Mara could ask. "I know," Mara said. "That's the problem." They tried to sleep in shifts, but sleep was cruel now. Sleep meant cracks in thought. Sleep meant empty spaces where she could slip in. And when Mara did finally doze, it wasn't rest that came. It was wood-grain dreams. She stood in a field where floorboards bloomed like flowers. Every step bent the earth beneath her into hallways. And above her, the sky creaked. A giant rocking chair floated across it like a second moon. From below, voices rose. A chorus of every version of her she'd left behind. "Build us," they begged. "Make us a home. You owe us that much." She woke up choking. Beside her, Nora was already sitting upright. Her eyes glowed faintly. For a moment, Mara wasn't sure if she was still dreaming. Then Nora spoke, but the voice was wrong. Too calm. Too measured. "She needs a nursery." Mara backed away. "Nora," the girl blinked. Her voice returned to normal, panicked, confused. "Did I say something?" Mara didn't answer. She just checked Nora's arms, her hands, her neck. No markings, no bruises. But then she saw it, a splinter embedded in the skin behind her ear. Thin, pale, fresh. She plucked it out gently. The moment it came free, the ground trembled. A low creaking groan rolled through the forest like a living thing shifting in its sleep. "She planted herself in you," Mara muttered. Nora shook. "I don't want her. You don't have a choice. But maybe we have time." Mara dug into her coat and pulled out a matchbook she'd swiped from the ranger station. There were 5 matches left. "Time for fire," she said. "Will it stop her?" "No," Mara whispered, "but it'll wake up other things." "What things?" "The ones who remember the house existed before she moved in." Nora stared at her. "There were others." "There always are," Mara said. "She's not the first. She's just the best at wearing the walls." They lit the matches one by one. Not to burn anything, to signal, to send smoke into the sky, not to the world above, but the one beneath, the old world, where shadows remembered, where silence was older than the hunger. Somewhere below them, something stirred. The house wasn't the only thing with blueprints. And Mara, half built, half lost, still had the faintest memory of the tools. The fifth match burned longer than the rest. It held its flame like it knew it wasn't just fire this time. It was a signal. A torch thrust into a place older than memory, older than names, older even than hunger. Mara and Nora watched the flame dance at the end of the thin wooden stick, its light flickering against the cracked walls of the abandoned rest stop. No wind, yet it pulsed. Bent, as if something was breathing on it. The moment it died, the temperature dropped. Not a chill, not the cold of night. A vacuum. A pull. Like the world had exhaled something it wasn't ready to speak aloud. Mara didn't move. Nora shivered but didn't speak. And then, all around them, wood creaked. Not the walls of the building they sat in. Not the trees groaning in windless air. It came from below. Like the earth was lined with floorboards, and something had just begun to shift them into place. "What did you call?" Nora asked, voice small. Mara looked down at her hands. They trembled like a child trying to grip a hammer too heavy for her bones. "I didn't call anything," she said, but something answered. Outside, the woods groaned again, and for the first time, the sound didn't carry the woman's rhythm. It was deeper, slower, a different pattern altogether. 3 long creaks, a pause, then silence, then a whisper that didn't come from the trees, but from the cracks in the air itself. She wasn't the first to feed it. Mara's breath caught. That voice, it wasn't hers. It wasn't Nora's. It was male, calm, aged in the way soil is aged, layered, waiting to be uncovered. She turned. The shadows outside had lengthened. But not toward the sun. They leaned inward. Toward the rest stop. Toward them. And standing just beyond the broken doorframe was a man. Or what looked like one. His body was built from shadows held in the shape of a person. His coat shimmered like wet charcoal, and his eyes, if they were eyes, glowed a faint, decaying orange, like coals beneath a layer of ash. He didn't enter. He didn't have to. The shadows brought his presence with them. They crawled into the building ahead of him, reaching under their feet, coating the walls, replacing the floorboard rot with something darker and somehow older. Mara stood slowly. "Who are you?" The figure tilted its head. "I was the one who tried to lock the hunger away. Long before it learned your name. You knew about the house." The man's shape crackled slightly, as if struggling to maintain its form. "The house came after. It was her body once. Then her cage. Then her tomb. Now it's her throne." He stepped forward, and the walls bent away from him. "She doesn't build homes. She burrows. Through generations. Through bloodlines. Through repetition. Your fear is her wood. Your memory, her nails." Mara swallowed hard. "Then how do we tear her down?" "You don't," the shadow said. "You build something stronger around her. You outgrow her. You create a structure she can't feed in." Nora stepped beside Mara, her small voice barely a whisper. "But she already started building me." The man knelt. Shadows rolled off his shoulders like smoke. "Then we start where she did, with a door. One that keeps her out." He stood again, and from the folds of his coat, he pulled a long, rusted nail. It wasn't metal. It pulsed. It hummed with something older than steel. With every second it existed, the air in the room shifted, like it was being rewritten. He handed it to Mara. "This is from the first structure, the original shape, before she stole it, before she twisted it into herself." Mara felt the nail burn in her palm, not with fire, with memory. Images flashed behind her eyes, faces she didn't know. Places that didn't exist. A door in the middle of the sea. A house inside a dying tree. A child placing a key into the mouth of a mountain. "You have until the next full breath," the man said. "Before she learns this shape too." Nora looked up at Mara. "What's a full breath?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he dissolved into the floor, No farewell, no final warning, just gone. The shadows with him. The rest stop groaned. And then, for the first time in what felt like days, birds chirped outside. Mara looked down at the nail. It didn't glow. It didn't pulse. But when she held it to the wall, the wood opened. Not cracked, not splintered. It parted, obedient, reverent, and behind it was a space neither of them had seen before. Empty, waiting for a frame, a structure, a choice. Mara turned to Nora. This time, we build our house. To live in, Nora asked. No, Mara said. To keep her out, Nora nodded slowly. And together, they stepped into the hollow space behind the wall. No blueprints, no instructions. Just that nail, that memory, and a promise. The house had taught them how to build, but it had never taught them how to protect. Now, they would. It wasn't wood behind the wall, it was bone. That's what Mara felt the moment her foot crossed the threshold into the new space. It looked like wood, but the texture, the way it curved and pulsed beneath the skin of the house, it felt alive. Not soft or fleshy. No, that would have been easier to face. This was structural, like stepping into the ribcage of something that had once stood upright and breathed, and looked back when you stared at it too long. And yet it waited, silent, expectant, like it had made room for her and her alone. The air was different here, not cleaner, heavier, somehow, but steadier. Like time slowed its breathing just enough to let her think again. Nora stayed close, her fingers wrapped tight around Mara's, her small face pale but composed. There was something steely in her now, like each night she spent, with the hunger nibbling at the edges of her mind, had hardened her, without letting her go brittle. Mara didn't know what that would turn her into, but it wouldn't be a victim. Not this time. The nail was still in her hand. Cool now, quiet. But as she held it near the farthest wall of the chamber, the wood, bone hybrid beneath it shifted. Patterns emerged, symbols carved in the faintest grooves. Not runes, not writing, something simpler, primal. It was a door frame, no door yet. Just the shape of one, outlined by silence. She used to come through something like this, Nora whispered, before there were houses. When she was still smaller, Mara looked at her. How do you know that? Nora shook her head. I don't. But the floor told me. Mara didn't ask for clarification. Not anymore. In this place, knowledge moved like fog. You didn't remember how you knew it. It just settled into your skin and waited to be used. And now, it was time to use it. She raised the nail, and for a moment, she saw her own reflection in the curved surface of the wall. Older than she was, gaunt, pale, eyed. Her skin drawn tight across cheekbones like scaffolding wrapped in memory. She blinked, and the face was hers again. Then she drove the nail into the wall. It sank in with no resistance, no crack of wood, no splinter. It simply slid in, as if the wall had been waiting for it. The room trembled. Nora gasped and took a step back. The doorframe lit up, not with fire, with memory. From each groove poured flashes, faces, moments, echoes of lives neither Mara nor Nora had lived. A woman giving birth in a stone hut under a storm-choked sky. A man carving the word home into the side of a cliff with a blade made of glass. A child closing her eyes and building a door in her dream to keep the dark out. These weren't just memories. They were the first defenses. Long before the house, before the hunger, before the woman with the stitched mouth had ever rocked in her chair and whispered her rhythm into the world. This was the blueprint of the original door. A door that was never meant to be opened, only guarded. Mara stumbled back as the images poured into her, flooding her nerves with truths too big for one mind. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. She reached into her coat and pulled out the smallest thing she had, a silver ring. Her mother's. She pressed it into the space beside the nail. The wall accepted it. Then Nora, with hands shaking but eyes locked in focus, stepped forward and pulled something from her own jacket pocket. A crumpled drawing, torn and wrinkled, of her family. 2 stick figures holding her hands. Parents long since buried, She didn't speak, just placed it against the wall. The wall accepted that too. This wasn't just a door, it was an offering, built not of planks and nails, but of what matters: love, grief, memory, the things the hunger couldn't digest, not fully. The wall closed itself, sealing the offerings within. Then came the hum, not music, not speech. A resonance, low, full of weight and silence and the promise of boundary. It filled the room, pushed through the walls, and spread out like roots cracking through pavement. Mara felt it travel through her spine. She felt the hunger flinch, far away, but watching. The rocking stopped. The woman in white, wherever she stood, whether in dreams or in corners of real rooms, Mara hadn't yet seen, paused, because something had changed. Mara had built something without her, something new. Not a trap, not a house, a limit. The door glowed brighter, and for the first time, Mara heard the hunger knock. It was faint, uneven, uncertain. Not 3 even beats like before, but 4, then 1. Then silence. Then 4 again. Mara smiled, lips trembling. She doesn't know the rhythm, she whispered. Not in this place. Nora stepped closer. So what do we do now? Mara looked at the door. The frame was complete, the offering sealed inside. But the door itself was still missing. It needs something final, she said. Something to shut her out for good. But what? Mara turned, slow, thoughtful. And then she knew. It needs her name. Not the hunger's name. The woman's. The one she was before the hunger swallowed her. Before the lullaby. Before the chair. Before the house. Mara didn't know how she knew it. But it curled in the back of her throat like a secret begging to be spoken. So she walked to the wall, pressed her palm flat against it, and whispered Kaelin. The room shuddered, the air split, the door sealed, and far away, in whatever corner of the nightmare the woman now dwelled, she screamed. It wasn't rage. It wasn't pain. It was recognition. Because someone had spoken her real name, and now the door remembered it too. Mara didn't know what would happen when she said the name. She expected thunder, a quake, something biblical. But what followed was worse, nothing, not silence, absence. The kind that hollows out the room you're in and makes you question whether you ever truly stood in it at all. The chamber dimmed, not from light fading but from reality receding, like the walls were trying to pull away from the name she'd just spoken, to avoid carrying the weight of it. Kaelin. It didn't echo. Echoes need walls to bounce from. The name just sat in the air, heavy, still, final. Nora hadn't moved since Mara whispered it. Her small face was pale, her breath shallow. Her lips trembled slightly like she'd heard the name before, but didn't know where, or when. Mara turned to her slowly. She wasn't always what she became. Nora blinked. Then what was she? And the word Mara wanted to say came into her mouth like a sob too big to hold. Someone. The door behind them glowed. It didn't shine. It pulsed, like a heart. And Mara understood something then that she hadn't before. The house had never been haunted. It had been wounded. It wasn't her prison. It was herself, built in layers and grief, out of memory and hunger and desperation. Kaelin had become something else. Yes, but it hadn't been instant. It had been earned. Through pain, through betrayal, through time. And it had been Mara's mistake to believe it could be destroyed by force alone. You called her by her real name, Nora said, her voice hushed. She remembers it now, Mara replied. But why would that stop her? It doesn't, Mara admitted, but it makes her vulnerable. Outside, something groaned. The trees themselves bent, not with wind, but with resistance, as if trying to brace against something crawling back into the world. The soil cracked, and then, in the distance, the unmistakable sound of rocking returned. Slow, measured, but something was off. The rhythm was wrong. Not quite 3 knocks. Not quite anything. Mara felt it deep in her chest. A stutter in the hunger's breath. She's confused, she whispered. She's trying to find a new rhythm. That's good, right? Nora asked. Mara didn't answer right away, because confusion didn't mean weakness. It meant adaptation. She's evolving, Mara said, rebuilding herself around the cracks. And if she can't reclaim her name, she'll make another one. Nora stepped back, fear flooding her face. Mine? Mara nodded. Unless we give her another choice. The door, the one they had built together, was no longer pulsing. It stood still, waiting, like a sealed wound. But Mara knew that wasn't the end of it. A wound left untouched festers. It needed more than sealing. It needed to be buried. And that meant finding where Callan had begun. Mara reached into her coat, pulled out the journal she'd carried since before the house, the one she used to take notes, sketch walls, chronicle her thoughts, pages of drawings, interviews, tape timestamps, all now stained with soot and streaked with ink smudged by sweat and fear. But in the middle, there was a single phrase she hadn't written. Begin where she ended. Mara stared at the page. It hadn't been there before. I think she's trying to show us something, she said. Callan. No, the one that's still left inside. Because a part of her hadn't given in. Not completely. And if Callan could be remembered, she could be found. Mara flipped the journal to the back and pulled out the photograph she'd kept hidden even from herself. It showed her grandmother, Delilah Crane, standing in front of a well. Not a well, the well from the black house. The one where Mara first found the doll. The one where the voice first whispered, "She gave me life to silence a child." That well wasn't just where the hunger spoke. It was where it was born. That's where it began, Mara whispered. Not in the house. Beneath it. Nora's eyes widened. Then we have to go back. Mara shook her head. We have to go deeper. The soil beneath them shifted again. The door behind them let out a low moan. The name Callan, though unsaid, pulsed in the air like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Mara reached into the wall beside the door and pressed her palm flat. Open, she said. The door swung inward. No sound, no ceremony, just a soft exhale. Beyond it, darkness. Stairs leading down, not into the house, but into the place beneath it. A space Callan had buried herself in to forget. A space Mara would now walk into to remember. You don't have to come, she told Nora, already knowing the answer. The girl didn't hesitate. I'm not letting her rename me. And so they stepped through, and the door closed behind them. Not to trap, to protect. Above, the wind shifted. A new knock echoed through the woods. But this time, it didn't belong to the hunger. It came from something older, something watching. The stairs wound downward longer than they should have. Each step brought Mara and Nora deeper into the dark, and deeper into the quiet, a quiet not made of peace, but pressure. It pressed against their skulls, their ribs, the backs of their teeth. A silence so heavy it rattled the bones. The door behind them had vanished as soon as it shut, swallowed by the walls that curved inward like they were alive, folding around the passage to keep them in, or to keep something else out. The air changed too. It smelled of wet stone and ash and something older. Not rot, but something before rot. The smell of things that had never lived, but had still died. The deeper they went, the louder Mara's blood sounded in her ears, each thud of her heart a reminder that she was still flesh, still human, still something she could feed on if the balance shifted. At the bottom of the stairwell, the world opened. Not into a room, not into a chamber, but into a void. A massive underground expanse that pulsed with slow, living breath. Walls of smooth obsidian curved around them in impossible shapes, like they'd been carved by memory itself rather than hands. At the center of it all, just barely illuminated by the dim glow that followed them down, stood the well. It wasn't broken. It wasn't ancient. It was pristine. Its stones were slick with moisture, glistening like polished bone. The bucket hung from a rope that twisted lazily, as if stirred by unseen fingers. And beneath the lip of the well, carved so faintly that it could only be read when the light moved just right, was a single word. Callan. Nora stopped beside Mara, her breath catching. I think this is where she remembered her name, she whispered. Mara didn't respond. because she wasn't sure the name had been remembered here. She thought it had been buried. Not in soil, not in stone, but in water. Something stirred far below, deep in the black where no light reached, and the whisper came. Not from the well, from within her own mouth. You gave me a name, it said, but not a reason. Mara staggered back. The voice wasn't cruel, it wasn't loud, it was tired, hollow, like it had spent too long speaking into dark rooms and never being answered. She's inside you, Nora said, but Mara shook her head. No, this isn't her. What do you mean? This is the part that didn't want to become her. Another ripple from below. Then, in the pit of Mara's mind, a new image rose. Not a house, not a room, a cradle, floating in water, empty, rocking gently. Then the same cradle, years later, in flames. No baby, just fire. Then darkness, then a chair, and then the whisper again she wanted to forget. But forgetting made her hungry. Mara's breath hitched. She stepped to the well and looked over the edge. Far below, for a split second, she saw it. A face. Hers. Then gone. The bucket rose. It hadn't moved seconds ago, but now it hung at chest level, the rope taut, water dripping from its underside. Inside the bucket was no doll this time. Inside was a name, written on a slip of paper, soaked and worn and curled like it had spent centuries submerged. But the ink was fresh, still wet, still forming. One letter at a time. The name wasn't Kaylin. It wasn't Nora. It wasn't Mara. It was something new. A child's name. A beginning. She's making another one, Mara whispered. A replacement. Something pure. Something unshaped. A version that never remembers her own hunger. Why? To outgrow the rhythm we broke. To start a new one. Nora leaned close. What do we do? Mara stared at the name, now half-formed, the ink twisting. Rewriting itself over and over like the house itself, couldn't decide who this new vessel should be. And suddenly, she understood. You don't starve the hunger, Mara said. You give it something it can't digest. She reached into her jacket and pulled out her notebook, the one that had recorded everything. The hallway, the dolls, the portraits, the moments that nearly took her sanity. Pages filled with fear, but also with truth. She dropped it into the bucket. It landed with a soft splash. The rope snapped downward, dragging the notebook and the name with it, vanishing into the dark below. A pause. Then the water in the well hissed. Steam billowed out, and from deep below came screaming. Not from the hunger, from the walls. The void trembled. The floor cracked. Veins of gold light surged through the black obsidian like lightning through glass. The name had reached her. The part of Kaylin that was still buried had seen something it couldn't consume. A record. Proof. A life witnessed. And the hunger, her hunger, didn't want memory. It wanted denial. Mara and Nora backed away as the well shook, as the stone around them cracked open, revealing flashes of other memories not their own. 1,000 cradles. 1,000 children. All of them almost her, none of them quite. The well gave a final hiss, and then stillness. No scream, no pull, no whisper. Just breath. Real, tired, and finally free. A voice rose from the well one last time. Not hungry, not hollow, just small. Thank you for not naming me, Mara cried. Not from fear, from relief. Then the floor beneath them collapsed. Not into darkness, into light, blinding, clean. And for a moment, just a moment, there was no hunger at all. Mara expected to fall into darkness. That's how these things usually ended, or began. Black void, bottomless pit. Her body swallowed by the thing that had followed her through every door, every whisper, every knock. But this was light. Not the gentle kind that touches your skin on a summer afternoon. Not the warm flicker of a candle. This light was raw, elemental. It didn't illuminate so much as expose. Her body didn't fall, it unraveled. Every cell, every thought, every echo of who she was or might have been peeled away like wet pages, not in pain, but with a terrifying sense of inevitability. The same way a name begins to feel strange when you say it too many times aloud. Mara Kimball had been said one time too many, and now the syllables slipped forgotten by the world that once whispered them back. Beside her, Nora floated, unmoving. Her eyes were open, but her body was limp, suspended in the same impossibly bright current, as if the light was holding her up the way gravity once had. Her outline was flickering, like two versions of her were fighting for dominance. One small and afraid, and another impossibly tall, with hair like woven smoke and a mouth stitched in golden thread. Mara tried to call out, but her voice didn't follow. Words had no place here. This wasn't a place for sound. It was a place for truth, and truth didn't need to be spoken. The light pulled her forward, not by force, but by certainty. Like a hand she couldn't see had gripped the center of her chest and guided her. She saw not with eyes, but with understanding, shapes forming around her, not as buildings or halls, but as possibilities. A door that could have been, a version of Callan who never rocked in a chair, a room that was never sealed, a lullaby never sung, every choice, every deviation, every moment that could have broken the cycle, but didn't. Then she saw the source, not a flame, not a sun. It was a figure. Not Callan, but a girl, barefoot. No eyes, no mouth, no scars. Not yet. Just a child sitting in the center of this impossible light, holding something in her lap. A mirror. Cracked. Old. Its surface shimmered not with reflection but with questions. Mara floated closer. The girl looked up, not with eyes, but with awareness. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She simply offered the mirror. Mara hesitated. She felt the heat press deeper now, into marrow, like the light wanted to peel the last of her away. But she knew, with the kind of certainty that could only be born in places like this, that to look into the mirror meant to see everything. Not just her part in all of it. She took the mirror. The glass didn't show her face. It showed rooms, thousands of them, all connected by threads of breath and blood and forgotten names. Each room had its own rhythm, some built by grief, others by love left to rot, some by guilt, some by silence. She saw the original house, not the one she walked into, but the first one Callan ever dreamed. It was small, a shelter built in fear after losing something no one had the words for. A child, a sibling, a name she wasn't allowed to speak, and in that first dream, she built the well. Not to hide anything, but to talk to it. That's where the hunger started. Not as a monster, as a need. A desperate need to be heard in a world where no one listened. Mara let the mirror drop. It didn't fall. It vanished. The girl in the light, Callan, before everything, faded slowly, turning to dust that floated into the current of the void around her, and the light began to dim. Slowly. Gently. As if it had done what it was made to do. Show the thing no one ever wanted to see. Mara collapsed. Real ground met her knees. Cold. Wet. She gasped, and air hit her lungs like fire. Breath returned with all its weight. Limbs ached. Vision stung. She was back. But the world had changed. Above her, dawn broke in fractured gold. Not just light, but real morning. Not the false light the house had tricked her with before. Real. The forest was gone. Burned away or maybe never there. What remained was a wide, open field. And in the center of it, Nora. Lying in the grass, blinking up at the sky. Olive, whole, and silent. Mara ran to her, heart thudding. She knelt, touched her shoulder. Nora looked at her and said, softly, I saw her. The real her. Mara nodded. Me too. They both stared at the horizon. No more rooms. No more walls. Just space, clean, empty. And for a moment, just one breath's worth, they believed it was over. But something shifted behind them. They turned. The well was still there. Cracked, dry, silent, but still there. Because you don't kill hunger. You contain it. You understand it. You refuse to feed it. And above the rim of the well, carved freshly now, was a single word: remember. Mara stood and took Nora's hand. They walked away together. Not running. Not afraid. Because they had seen the center. They had seen the child before the hunger. And that meant they could stop her from becoming again. They just had to remember. Every day. Every breath. To never build the first door. For days, maybe weeks, Mara couldn't tell anymore. She and Nora wandered the blank fields where the house had once rooted itself into memory. The sky stayed open, cloudless. The grass bent gently with winds that had no direction. It was too quiet, too clean, not in the comforting sense, but in the way an erased chalkboard is clean. There was no sound of birds, no hum of insects, not even the faint drone of distant life. It was as if the world had wiped a page and forgotten to turn it. And deep beneath that silence was something else. Waiting. They never ventured too far from the well. No matter how far they walked, its broken rim eventually appeared ahead of them again. Sometimes it came after a straight path, other times it appeared just after a turn. One night, it was there when they awoke, sitting 10 feet from their camp, even though they'd left it miles behind. The message was clear, they hadn't escaped it. The well had let them go. For now. On the 4th night, if it was the 4th, Nora stopped eating. She didn't say she was sick, didn't claim fear or hunger. She just stared at the horizon, quiet, still. And on the 5th, she began to hum. Not the lullaby, not the one from the house. This was something new, a tune with no rhythm, no pattern, no echo. It sounded like a melody trying to find itself, uncertain, halting. Mara froze the first time she heard it. Where'd you learn that? Nora didn't look at her. Nowhere. It just came. That terrified Mara more than anything else, because something had left a mark in the girl. Not possession, not control, but a seed, a root. Even though they had broken the rhythm, interrupted the knocking, shattered the door, some part of the hunger remained. Not as a force, but as a habit. A shadow Nora might mistake for her own thought one day. A tendency passed on like a family heirloom no one remembers accepting. That night, Mara didn't sleep. She watched the well from a distance, sitting cross-legged beneath the open sky. Stars looked down like quiet witnesses, cold and unreachable. She pulled her coat tighter, even though the air wasn't cold. Her notebook was gone, burned in the bucket, erased to stop the rewriting. But some things refused to disappear. As the stars shifted overhead, she heard the grass whisper. It moved like something walking, but no footsteps came, just parting blades brushing against nothing. Then a shape, not large, a child. Mara didn't move. Her breath caught in her throat. The girl stepped forward. She wasn't Nora. She wasn't Kaylin. She wasn't anything Mara recognized, but she felt known, familiar. The girl had no shadow. Her feet didn't touch the earth, and her eyes weren't eyes at all. They were doors. Closed, waiting. Who are you? Mara asked, voice barely a breath. The girl tilted her head. I'm the one you didn't name. Mara's stomach dropped. You came from the well, she whispered. The girl smiled, but it was empty. No, I came from what wasn't put in it. She stepped closer. Every time you didn't finish a thought, every time you buried a feeling instead of feeding it, I grew in the cracks. Mara stood, heart pounding. We broke the rhythm. The hunger is gone. The girl nodded. That hunger, yes, but you forgot the most important part. Mara's throat tightened. What? That hunger learned from you. But I was born from what it could never understand. She looked toward the horizon. I'm not here to knock. Mara shook her head. Then what are you here for? The girl turned her gaze back. For the first time, something flickered behind her smile. Not malice. Curiosity. To ask you what happens when no one opens the door. Mara stared at her, stunned. No one had ever refused before. No one had ever said no and meant it. Every person the house had taken over the centuries had done it the same way. Hesitating. Hoping. Answering the knock because silence was worse than whatever might be on the other side. And in that gap, the house was born. The hunger filled the space. Because to something like that, invitation was everything. The girl took a step closer, and suddenly, her eyes opened. Not fully, just a sliver. Inside them, Mara saw herself, sitting, waiting, in a chair that rocked, and beside her, Nora, older, eyes hollow, still humming, still unfinished. "I'm not going to feed you," Mara whispered. The girl didn't react. She just turned and began to walk away. But before her outline vanished into the open field, she stopped. "I'm not the hunger." Mara froze. The girl looked over her shoulder. "I'm what comes after." Then she vanished. Not like a ghost, like a choice unmade. In the distance, the well groaned. Mara stood there for a long time, listening. To the wind, to the hum in the air, to the way memory stretches when it's held too tightly. And finally, she understood. It wasn't about the house. It wasn't even about Callan. It was about what people do after the door stays closed. Because if they waited long enough, they might start building their own. Sleep had become a memory for Mara. Not because nightmares stalked her, it would have been easier if they had, but because dreams no longer came. When she closed her eyes now, she didn't fall into rest. She fell into pause, a limbo where time stretched and folded like thin fabric. Her mind didn't wander, it waited. As though even the inside of her head was holding its breath, bracing for something to begin that had already ended too many times. And across the field, the well remained, cracked, silent, unmoving, but never gone. That morning, or what passed for morning in this timeless place, Nora stood at the edge of the field with something in her hands. A stick. She was drawing circles into the dirt, careful ones. Not perfect, but precise. Her lips didn't move, but her mouth twitched like she was mouthing something silently. Not a lullaby, not a name. Just breath, measured, rhythmic. Mara approached her slowly. "What are you doing?" she asked. Nora paused. Looked up. "I don't know," she said. "It just feels right." Mara knelt beside her, looked at the symbol. Not a circle, a door frame. Not unlike the one they had built inside the rest stop. Except this one wasn't meant to close anything out. It was waiting to open. "Nora," Mara said slowly, "did something speak to you again?" Nora didn't respond right away. She touched the center of the symbol with her palm, closed her eyes. "I think," she whispered, "I think I've always known how to make one. I just never wanted to before." Mara's stomach twisted, because she remembered the girl in the field, the one with no name, no knock, the one who asked, "What happens when no one opens the door?" And now Nora was building one. Not with wood, not with nails, but with understanding. This was different than the house. More insidious, because it didn't come from fear, it came from curiosity. Mara grabbed Nora's hand. "We can't open anything. Not now. Not again." Nora looked at her with something in her eyes Mara hadn't seen before. Not fear, not anger, but distance. Like she was already too far away. "I'm not opening it," she said softly. "It's already open. I'm just making it visible." And Mara realized the truth. The doors had never been built with wood, or drawn with chalk. They had always existed, hanging in the corners of every thought people didn't finish. Every scream never let out. Every question never dared to be asked. The house had just given them shape. And now, Nora was shaping one without knowing. Because once something's been named, it can be rebuilt, rewritten, passed down. The soil under the circle began to shift, just slightly. A throb, like a vein beneath the earth. Mara stood fast. "We're leaving." "But where is there to go?" Nora asked. "Everything just circles back here." Mara didn't have an answer, but she had a feeling. One she hadn't let herself follow until now. They had been waiting for the world to rebuild itself around them. What if the only way forward was through the past? The original house was gone. The rest stop, the woods, even the memories that tied them together had started to bleed at the edges, fading like dreams you forget the second you wake. But Mara still remembered where it began. Before the hallway, before the rooms, before the woman with the sewn mouth, Delilah Crane, her grandmother. The first person who'd warned her to never listen to what knocks. Delilah had been the first to break the rhythm, but she'd also sown the seeds of it, because that's what the hunger did. It hid in lineage. Names passed down like trinkets, memories buried like bones, We're going to the place she died, Mara said. Nora blinked. But you said it burned. Not all of it, Mara whispered. Because she remembered now. There was one place the fire hadn't touched. The greenhouse. The place Delilah always kept locked. Because some things don't burn. Especially when they're meant to regrow. The next night the stars shifted again. Not overhead, but in the ground. The circle Nora had drawn began to faintly glow, not with power, with recognition. It was being seen, remembered, and if it stayed, it would eventually draw the ones who waited on the other side. So before it could finish forming, Mara destroyed it. She stomped it out with her heel, scattering the lines, breaking the pattern. Nora screamed, not in pain, in loss. She didn't even understand why she felt that way. That's how deeply the hunger had embedded itself in her. It didn't want fear anymore. It wanted inheritance. But Mara wasn't letting it pass on. Not again. We're leaving at first light, she said. No more resting. No more waiting. We find the greenhouse. And what if it's not there? Nora whispered. Then we build it, Mara replied. From memory. From truth. From what they couldn't digest. Because now she knew. The worst door isn't the one that knocks. It's the one you build without meaning to. They left before the first trace of sun pierced the gray sky. Not that the light had ever truly returned. It remained diluted, like it passed through gauze, or worse, something alive. Mara didn't trust it. She hadn't trusted anything since the well stopped whispering, and the door in Nora's drawing began to open on its own. But she had one anchor left, Delilah's greenhouse. A place Mara had only stepped into once as a child. When her grandmother's hands were still steady, her eyes still sharp. Delilah had grabbed her by the wrist that day and said, "There are things that root too deep to pull out, baby girl. And if you water them with memory, they come back bigger." At the time, Mara had thought it was about gardening. Now she wasn't so sure. The field behind them began to blur. Not fade, not vanish, just forget. Like the land no longer wanted to remember what had been grown there. Like the ground was covering its own tracks. Even the well, which had stood eternal in every iteration of their escape, began to distort, its silhouette bending and thinning, stretching into a shape that looked more like a spine than stone. Mara never looked back once. It took them a full day of walking to reach the old road, and there it was, half-paved, overrun by weeds, forgotten by maps. The dirt tasted like ash when the wind blew. The trees had thinned, not from death, but retreat, as if something farther down the path had scared even the bark from growing. Mara followed the way by memory, not sight. Every step closer brought a noise into her ears, faint at first, a hum. Not mechanical, not natural. It was the sound a throat makes when someone is trying not to speak, the pressure of words crushed and sealed behind sewn lips. And then, just past a broken fence, there it was, the greenhouse, unburned, untouched. But wrong, its glass panes were too clean, not cracked, not dusted by years of weather. They reflected the sky with too much clarity, like mirrors. The door had no hinges, just a seam where the frame met the frame. No handle, no welcome. And yet, Nora stepped forward like she'd been here before. "You feel it?" Mara asked. Nora nodded, her voice barely audible. "It remembers us." That chilled Mara more than the cold. She placed her palm against the glass, half expecting it to burn or shatter. Instead, it breathed. A puff of condensation bloomed beneath her hand, like an exhale, like the greenhouse wasn't just alive, it had been waiting to be touched again. The door opened without sound. Inside, the air was green. Not just the smell or the light, but the air itself. Heavy with chlorophyll and something wetter, deeper. The scent of things that grow underground. Mushrooms, roots, things that live without sunlight. The plants weren't familiar. Some had leaves shaped like keys. Others had petals that curled inward like fists. A single tree stood at the center, its bark smooth as porcelain, its limbs too symmetrical to be natural. Mara stepped inside. The light dimmed behind her. Nora followed, silent. The door closed, not from wind, from choice, and suddenly Mara could feel it. The pull, not forward, down. Beneath the soil of the greenhouse, something was buried, not hidden, planted. Mara walked toward the tree. The closer she came, the more she saw that its trunk was not made of wood, but hair. Thick black strands, braided together like vines, twisting around a core too dark to name. And at its base, half buried in soil, was Delilah's old rocking chair, perfectly preserved. Still rocking, still warm. No, Mara whispered, voice cracking. Because she'd seen this before. The Hunger's shrine. But this wasn't the Hunger's. This was Delilah's. The origin. The first root. The place where memory wasn't lost. It was farm. Nora approached the chair, her hand outstretched. Mara lunged forward. Don't sit in it! Nora blinked, startled. Why not? Because that's how it starts. Starts what? The forgetting. The chair stopped rocking. The hum ceased. And from the tree above them, a single pod cracked open. Something fell from it. Something small. Mara picked it up. It was a tooth. Her grandmother's, still gold cap. Still warm. She dropped it like it burned her. From the dirt, a voice emerged. Low, croaking, rooted. You can't kill the seed, baby girl. Mara backed up. Nora stood still, frozen. And then the ground opened beneath them, only an inch. Just enough to show what was below. Rows upon rows of faces, pressed against glass, screaming silently, not dead, stored. Delilah had kept them. Every memory, every dream, every person who ever touched the rhythm and pulled away too late. Mara fell to her knees, because she understood now. Delilah hadn't just fought the hunger. She'd fed it, on her terms, in her chair, in her greenhouse, harvesting memory like fruit. The hunger didn't begin in the house. It began here. Not with a knock, with a root. Nora turned slowly, her voice hollow. Do you hear it? Mara listened. There was no sound. Just a feeling. The sensation of something growing. Inside her. In the parts of her she didn't guard anymore. Because the worst kind of door is the one you plant inside someone and forget to warn them about. Mara had thought she'd broken the cycle. Thought she'd buried the hunger with truth, burned the house with memory, silenced the rhythm by giving the name back to the one who lost it. But she hadn't stopped anything. She'd only changed its shape. Because here, inside the greenhouse that should have rotted years ago, Delilah Crane's hands were still working, through bark, through soil, through bloodlines. And her legacy was not death. It was preservation. She didn't starve the hunger. She taught it how to grow. The chair hadn't moved. Yet its presence thickened the air, tugging at Mara's spine like gravity had changed direction. She refused to look at it again. Not directly. Because in this place, what you acknowledged became real. And if the rocking chair was truly empty, then something was wrong with the shape of the shadows around it. Nora crouched near one of the buried faces beneath the glass floor. It was a boy, maybe 9 or 10. His mouth was open mid-scream, but no sound came. His eyes flicked toward Mara. She staggered back. He wasn't an echo. He was aware. How long has he been here? Nora whispered. Mara shook her head. Longer than us. Longer than the house. They were standing on a storage room for memory. No, not memory. Story. That's what Delilah had been keeping. Not people. Not souls. She was keeping unfinished stories, locking them beneath the greenhouse in glass coffins so they couldn't ever reach an ending. Because endings gave things power. But if you kept a story in the middle, if you held it in pause, it could be harvested again and again. Replanted. Rewritten. She wasn't fighting the hunger, Mara said aloud, more to herself than to Nora. She was cultivating it. Nora stood slowly, her face pale. I think it's trying to finish me. What? The girl's voice trembled. I feel like a sentence someone started and left open. Mara rushed to her, placed her hands on Nora's cheeks. No, you're not one of them. You ended your story. You stood up in the house. You made it through. But I don't feel through, Nora whispered. I feel like a comma. The ground beneath the chair shuddered. And then, for the first time in over a decade, a voice Mara hadn't heard since childhood filled the air, not from above, not from below, but from within the chair itself. "You think a name can stop the harvest," it croaked. Mara stepped between Nora and the chair. "I think a name can remember what the roots tried to erase." Silence. Then the back of the chair arched upward, like a spine straightening after years of slumping. It wasn't Delilah sitting there. It wasn't Kaylin. It wasn't even a person anymore. It was something made of recollection, of dried breath and false lullabies. The shape of Delilah's body was just the shell it wore, like bark wrapping rot. "You left me behind," the thing said. "No," Mara said, shaking. "You buried yourself. I preserved what needed to grow. You preserved your guilt." The air turned hot, wet. Every plant in the greenhouse curled inward. Nora clutched Mara's arm, shaking. "She's rewriting again." The faces below began to twitch. Their mouths moved in unison now. 4 words, repeated again and again, silent but insistent. Don't end the story. That's what they were here for. Delilah had kept them unfinished. Because a story without an ending is still hungry. And now the hunger wasn't asking to be fed. It was asking to be continued. The chair rose slightly from the ground. Its legs snapped like roots being pulled. The tree at the center of the greenhouse split open down the middle with a long, splitting wail of bark tearing. Inside was a doorway. Not drawn, not built, ground. Woven from tendrils of hair and bone and narrative intent. Delilah's voice was everywhere now. "You can leave. Take the girl. Walk through the door. I'll never follow." Mara didn't trust it. "Why?" "Because I won't need to," the voice said gently. "You'll carry me with you." Mara turned to Nora. The girl's eyes had gone glassy. Her fingers twitched rhythmically. She was being written again. A new version. A story without the house, without the hunger, without the scars. A better ending. But one Mara hadn't chosen. One that wasn't true. She stepped toward the doorway and shouted into it, "I won't take her." The voice paused. "Then, coldly then, you'll both be left unwritten." The greenhouse groaned. Roots ripped from the soil. The walls trembled. This wasn't about escaping. This was about choosing the ending before someone else did. Mara turned to Nora, gripped her shoulders hard. "You are not a story someone else gets to tell. You are your own ending." "But I don't know what I am without them," Nora choked. "Without the house, without the fear." Mara looked into her eyes. "Then be the girl who chose to leave the page." Behind them, the doorway began to close. Its edges twisted, collapsing inward. They had seconds. Mara grabbed Nora's hand. Together they ran, not through the door, but into the roots. Through the tree's split heart. They didn't step into a room. They stepped into soil. Into the black, breathing loam of Delilah's memory. And Mara screamed her own name into the dark, so that no one else could rewrite it. So that if she vanished, it would be on her terms. With a period, not a comma. It felt like drowning in something that didn't want you dead, only changed. The roots swallowed them fast, not like vines but like veins, pulling them deeper into a body they hadn't asked to enter. Earth pressed in on every side, wet, warm, and pulsing. Not dead soil, not dead at all. Mara couldn't tell if it was breathing around her or if it was using her breath to breathe. Nora's hand was still clutched in hers, but it had gone stiff, rigid, the kind of stillness you only find in porcelain or forgotten dolls. Mara gritted her teeth and held tighter. This wasn't just Delilah's memory. This was her rewrite. And they were the ink. Mara hit the ground first. Hard. The moment felt torn from a nightmare she hadn't had yet. Landing in a room with no walls, just hanging lamps swinging from invisible strings. The bulbs weren't lit. They hummed. One low tone, constant and inside it breath. Heavy. Tired. A breath that had been waiting a long time to exhale. Nora dropped beside her with a thud, but didn't rise. Instead, she opened her eyes slowly, like waking in a place she already feared. The space around them was gray and shifting, shaped like a hallway but bleeding at the edges. The air was wrong, not stale, but too clean, like someone had scrubbed the world raw. Mara stood, knees buckling, and stared ahead. At the far end of this shifting space was a door, painted black. Old, the original one, not a memory, not a copy, the first door Delilah had ever knocked on, the one no one was ever supposed to open. It was small, barely tall enough for a child, but the space around it bent, like the door was the center of a whirlpool, sucking in all shape, all thought. Its wood pulsed in time with the hum, and carved into it, scrawled over years of scratches and half-erased names, were 3 letters M.K. Mara Kimball. Her name, not Kaylin, not Nora, hers. Delilah hadn't just preserved others' stories. She'd been rewriting Mara's the entire time. "You were always the next gardener," a voice said behind her. Mara spun. Delilah stood there. Not the woman from her childhood. Not the husk in the chair. This Delilah was tall, strong, whole. But her eyes were empty, glazed with the color of old stone. She wore her grief like a shawl, draped but never fastened, always threatening to slip off, but never quite letting go. "You left me behind," Mara said. "I planted you," Delilah replied. "And waited. For what? For you to ripen." Mara's stomach turned. She stepped in front of Nora. "She's not yours." Delilah nodded. "She's yours." That was worse somehow. "You made us part of this," Mara said. "You turned us into unfinished thoughts so you could prune us later." "I gave you a story," Delilah said. "Do you know how many wander this world begging for one? Not this one. Every story is hunger," Delilah said, stepping closer. "Yours just learned how to feed." The door pulsed behind Mara. Its wood cracked. Not from age, from pressure. It wanted to be opened. No, it wanted to be closed, because it had been half open this entire time. That's why the house could grow. Why the rhythm echoed through walls and lullabies. Why the hunger changed faces. Because the original door was still ajar. Delilah stepped forward. "I couldn't end it. I tried. I fed it truth, memory, pain. But none of it closed the door. It just bought time." Mara clenched her fists. "Then I'll end it." Delilah smiled sadly. "You don't end stories like this. You live them. And eventually they live you." "No." Mara turned back to the door. The letters MK shimmered. Because this was never Delilah's door. It was Mara's. She was the story the hunger had followed all along. Kaylin was just a chapter. Nora, a line. Delilah, a tragic prologue. But Mara, she was the ending. Mara walked toward the door. Nora stirred behind her. Delilah didn't move. As Mara reached the wood, her name pulsed once more, like a warning, or a farewell. She placed her hand on it. The surface was warm, alive. And beneath her fingers, the door breathed in. "You can close it," Delilah said softly. "But it will hurt." Mara looked back at her. At the woman who'd started this with silence and stitching, who'd tried to prune the hunger into a garden. "I'm not afraid of pain," Mara said. She turned back to the door and whispered, "My story ends here." Then, with both hands, she pushed. The hum crescendoed. The lights shattered, and the door screamed. Not with sound, with loss. Because the hunger didn't feed on fear. It fed on possibility. On stories that might have been. And now, Mara took them away. When the door clicked shut, everything went still. No air, no time, no names. Just the finality of a page turned for good. Then light, soft, true. Mara stood alone. Nora was gone. Delilah, gone. The hallway, gone. Just a field again. This time green, alive, and in the distance, a well. But it was filled, covered, and above it, a single sign staked in the ground. 3 words carved deep. Dio no kenosike. Mara smiled. Because for the first time in generations, there was no more door. Just the silence that follows a story truly ended. The grass was real. For the first time in what felt like centuries, it felt real. Cool, alive, bending beneath Mara's bare feet, with no secret pull beneath. The air didn't taste like ash or breath or memory. It was just air, thin and sharp in her lungs. Her name no longer echoed in the wind. No more knocking, no more doors. No more whispers seeping from walls like mold. Her story had ended. She'd closed it with her own hands, given it punctuation, a full stop, and yet Mara couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Not a sound, not a whisper, but a presence, a residue, like something clung to the edge of her spine, just out of reach, not watching, clinging, as if her decision to close the door didn't seal the world, it simply sealed her inside it. She turned slowly, eyes scanning the new field. It looked too perfect. The green stretched endlessly in all directions, unmarred by trees or rock or broken fences. No sign of the greenhouse, no rest stop, no cracked well, nothing. The only anomaly was the sign Dio Noat Kano CK. Even that, with its harsh lettering, looked too deliberate. As if someone placed it there after the ending, like a postscript. Mara approached it, touched the wood. It was wet, with something thicker than dew. She recoiled. Her fingers glistened red. Blood, not hers. Fresh, and that's when she noticed the hole, right behind the sign, a small one. No wider than a knuckle, just beneath the surface of the soil. Something had tried to crawl out. Mara's stomach turned. No. She dropped to her knees and began clawing at the dirt. Fast, frantic. Her hands were mud and blood in seconds. Her breath came hard. Not out of panic, but rage. Because this wasn't supposed to happen. She'd closed the door. She ended the story. There was nothing left to dig up. But the earth didn't care about her endings. It only cared about what was left behind. 2 feet down, she found it. Not a body. Not a bone. Just a shadow. Not cast by light, but grown in the shape of her. It was stitched into the dirt like a scar. Its outline matched her exactly. Same curve of the jaw. Same angle of the shoulders, but no face. Just a void where the features should be, and in the center of its chest, drawn in thin, delicate twine, was a new door. Not wooden, flesh, still beating. Mara staggered back. The shadow didn't move, but it pulsed. Just once, a reminder that doors are not always built in walls. Sometimes they're born in consequences. Because she had made a choice. She had ended the story. But the ending cost her something. And the story, like any living thing, wanted it back. She heard movement behind her, turned fast. Nothing. But the grass, perfect moments ago, had started to bend. In a path, a wide circle, enclosing her. Not fast, slow, measured, rhythmic. 3 steps, pause. 3 steps, pause. There was no sound of feet, just the gentle shiver of each blade folding under something that shouldn't be there. Then she heard it, a voice. Small, familiar. I didn't knock. Mara froze. That voice. She turned slowly, heart pounding. Nora stood 20 feet away, pale alone, eyes wide and blank. Barefoot, in a hospital gown stained with red and ash. Mara ran to her, grabbed her by the shoulders. "Nora, you're safe! You made it!" But Nora didn't move, didn't blink, didn't see. She just repeated, "I didn't knock," again and again, until her mouth no longer moved. But the voice still came. That's when Mara realized. Nora was empty. A vessel, left behind, because the hunger had learned. It didn't need doors anymore. It needed carriers, people filled with unfinished stories, people who didn't knock, but still opened. Mara backed away. Nora's eyes flicked toward the hole in the dirt, toward the shadow stitched in soil, and smiled. Not a child's smile. A memory's smile. Delilah's smile. "You didn't end it," she said. Then, her chest cracked open, quiet, effortless, like paper splitting down the spine. And from the space between her ribs, a new rhythm began. Not 3 knocks, not 4, just one, again, and again, and again. No pattern, no rules, just persistence, like a heart refusing to stop. And from the open wound, a thread extended. It slithered across the grass toward Mara's feet. Red, wet, hungry, it coiled around her ankle, not tight, but certain. As if to say, you may have ended the story, but you're still part of the next. Mara screamed, and the field fell away. Not the world, just her place in it. She fell with no gravity, no up, no down, only away. As though the ground had rejected her presence. Like the story she tried to end was now editing her out. The field, the blood, Nora's hollow eyes, all of it shredded behind her like pages torn in the wind. But she didn't scream. Screaming felt useless here, like a sound that would get absorbed before it ever left her mouth. What would she scream at, anyway? This wasn't space. It wasn't even void. It was the gutter between stories, the thin slit between chapters where ink still drips and nothing is yet decided. Mara's body twisted in slow arcs. The air, or what replaced it, was thick with whispers. Not voices, not in the true sense, but impressions. Regret with a shape, doubt with a scent. She passed one like a gust and nearly vomited. It smelled like old rot and wet paper. A sentence, maybe. A memory someone had tried to forget. And she was drifting through them all. The library of things people buried when they closed doors too soon. Eventually, her fall slowed. Or stopped. She wasn't sure. Her feet met something solid, though she didn't feel the impact. She stood on what looked like ink, black and glassy, reflecting nothing. But beneath her feet, her reflection walked away. She gasped and turned. It didn't. It was her. Her age. Her eyes. But different. Lighter. Not just in weight, but in presence. She was empty in a terrifying way. Like someone who had been completely rewritten until nothing remained but the outer shape. It smiled without teeth. "Do you see now?" the reflection said without moving its lips. Mara took a step back. "You're me," the reflection tilted its head. "No. I'm what you become if you decide nothing else matters." "What are you talking about?" It raised a hand and pointed to the space behind Mara. She turned and saw every version of herself she could have been. Hundreds, thousands, scattered like dominoes into infinity. Mara as a child who ran away from home and never returned. Mara who never stepped into the rest stop. Mara who never saved Nora. Mara who answered the knock. They weren't moving. They stood like statues, expressions frozen in variations of fear, rage, silence. All stuck, stories paused, never finished. "What is this place?" she whispered. Her reflection stepped closer, still smiling. "This is where stories come when they're abandoned." Each version of Mara turned in unison and looked at her. Eyes hollow. Mouths sealed with invisible thread. "You're not supposed to see this," the reflection said. "But you forced an ending where one wasn't allowed. And when you do that, something must be taken back." Mara stepped away, shaking her head. "I closed the door." The reflection nodded. "You did. And I made sure the story ended." "Yes," it said, "but you forgot one thing." Its smile faded. "You ended the wrong one." Mara's knees buckled. Because deep down, she knew. It wasn't just about her. The hunger, the rhythm, the knocking. It wasn't one story. It was a system. A maze of broken narratives feeding off one another. And Mara had only cut one thread in a web that stretched across generations. "You're not being punished," the reflection said, voice softening. "You're being written in." "To what?" The smile returned. The story after the ending. Then the ground of ink began to ripple. Beneath her, figures started to rise. Not from below, from within, like they'd been painted over and were now being uncovered by an unseen brush. People she recognized. The woman with the sewn mouth. Kalen, half his face missing. Nora, young and old, smiling and screaming at the same time. Delilah, crying. And dozens of others. Each with a piece of Mara inside them, not metaphorically. Literally. Bits of her memories, her fears, her thoughts. They had been splintered off and used as ink in other stories. "You thought you closed the door," the reflection said. "But you were the door, Mara, and now it was time for her to open." The sky, if it could be called that, peeled away, and for the first time since she fell, Mara saw the writers. They weren't people. They weren't gods. They were eyes, floating, blinking in sequences, reading, waiting. Because someone had to carry the next story, and Mara had proven she could survive her own. Which meant she could survive others. She screamed now, and it echoed, not because sound returned, but because someone was listening, from above, from below, from outside the page. And the moment that sound escaped her throat, The ink floor cracked. The reflections disappeared. The statue shattered, and a hand reached up from the fracture. A real one, flesh, Nora's, but not hollow. Alive, trembling. "Come back," she whispered. Mara grabbed it. The ink shattered completely. The eyes blinked, and the world began writing again. The pull of Nora's hand was the only thing that felt real. It yanked Mara out of the ink, cracked void like a hook through the center of her spine. She didn't remember how it felt to breathe, but her lungs filled like they were being reminded by something older than instinct. When her knees hit solid ground again, she expected pain. Instead, the ground was soft, familiar. Not grass, not ash, carpet, patternedly. Like the kind you'd find in an old roadside motel where nothing ever quite worked. But somehow everything still ran. The smell hit her next. Bleach and mildew. Her head snapped up. They were in a hallway. Not the hallway, but close. It was different, warmer somehow, dimly lit. One overhead bulb flickering, just enough to remind you it might go out at any second. Doors lined the corridor, each identical dark wood, brass knobs. A small peephole that never blinked but always felt like it might. Nora stood at the far end. She looked alive, tired, hollow-eyed, but herself. And when Mara met her gaze, the girl's lip trembled. "You made it back." Mara rose slowly, every muscle tensed like she'd walked through electricity. "I thought you were gone." Nora whispered, but something pulled me back too. They stood facing each other. Two survivors who weren't sure whether they'd survive the same thing. Behind them, the doors stretched farther than they should. Infinite, maybe. The hallway curved subtly, just enough that you couldn't see the end, only the next bend. It reminded Mara of intestines, like they were standing inside the belly of something pretending to be safe. "I think this place listens," Nora said. "Not like the house. Not in rhythms. More like it waits." Mara nodded slowly. A breath passed between them. Silent, but filled with all the things they'd seen and could no longer say aloud. Then came the voice. Faint. From one of the doors. A knock, but not the kind they feared. Just a gentle tap. Once, twice. Then silence, no rhythm, no hunger. Just curiosity. Mara stepped toward it, and Nora's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. "You don't have to open it, I know." "Then, why are you going?" Mara turned her head, meeting her eyes. "Because someone else might." Nora didn't speak. She understood. They were beyond endings now. This place, this corridor, this stitched-together echo of story and silence, was a place where doors went when they no longer knew where to belong. Mara stepped up to the door that had knocked. She didn't open it, just placed her hand against the wood. It was warm, not alive, but not dead either, a waiting thing. She leaned in, whispered against the grain of it. Not this time. The knock didn't come again. Behind her, another door opened, by itself. Mara turned sharply, but there was no threat behind it, just a room, empty, a chair, a table, a notebook, and a single sentence written in red ink. "If you write the ending, it writes you back." Nora stepped beside her, reading it. "I don't think this is the story's house anymore," she said. Mara shook her head. "It's ours." And the longer she stood there, the more the hallway changed. The carpet shifted, becoming a pattern she remembered from her childhood home. The doors shaped slightly. Some were now cracked, old, peeling with the scent of musty basements, others pristine and glossy, reflecting back versions of her face she'd never met. This was the library of every path she hadn't taken, every version of her life that had been derailed, stolen, rewritten. And now, she could walk them. All of them. But the question remained, should she? Mara looked to Nora. "What if we leave them closed? What if we let the silence stay?" Nora answered without blinking. "Then someone else finds them eventually. They always do." Mara sighed. Her fingers itched. Not from fear, from something else. Creation. She stepped into the room, the one with the table and the chair, and sat down, picked up the pen. The ink inside shimmered, dark red like blood that had finally dried but refused to forget. She didn't write a story. She wrote a warning, then tore the page from the book and slipped it beneath the nearest door. It slid through without resistance. A moment later, another door opened. Another empty room. Another notebook. Another pen. No knock this time. Just invitation. Mara smiled. She understood now. They weren't trapped. They were keepers. Not of horror, but of memory. Of warnings. Of endings. So others wouldn't have to live them blindly. You ready? She asked. Nora stepped forward. Let's write better endings. And as they moved forward, door by door, the hallway reshaped around them. Not darker, not heavier, but more honest, because the hunger had ruled by silence and patterns. But this place, it spoke. And Mara, she was finally ready to answer. They didn't plan to stay in the hallway forever. That was never the goal. But doors have a way of holding people, even when they're not locked. Each one they passed whispered in its own way. Some breathed, some pulsed, some did nothing at all, and yet screamed the loudest. Mara stopped naming them after the 10th. Instead, she started marking them. A soft X with a bit of coal dragged across the top panel. She didn't know what it meant yet, but her hand did it before she could think. Nora followed her silently, sometimes veering toward a door like she could smell something only she could understand. But she never touched a handle. Not once. And then they found the room that refused to forget. They didn't know that's what it was. Not at first. It looked like the others, plain wood. Brass knob, faded number etched where a peaful should be. This one read 23. A meaningless number. Yet it buzzed in Mara's spine like she'd once whispered it in a dream. There was no knock this time. No hum. No flicker of invitation. Just presence. A thick pressure that folded the air around it, like the room had lungs and was holding its breath. Do you feel that? Nora asked. Mara nodded. It wasn't threat. It wasn't comfort. It was recognition. As if the door had seen them long before they arrived. Mara didn't hesitate. She reached out and turned the knob. It clicked like a bone resetting, and the door swung open on its own. They stepped inside together. What lay beyond wasn't a room. Not fully. It was a space pulled from multiple timelines, stitched together into one suffocating memory. Half the floor was marble, slick with footprints and candle wax. The other half carpet, burnt and torn. On one wall hung a child's crayon drawing of a house without windows. On another, a photograph of a man whose face had been scratched out with something sharper than nails. In the center of the room was a mirror. Tall, framed in splintered wood. It wasn't Mara's face reflected there. It was Kalen, smiling, alive, whole. But the longer she stared, the more she noticed it wasn't quite him. His smile never changed. His eyes didn't blink. He just stood there, in the mirror, waiting. Nora stepped forward. That's not Kalen, she whispered. No, Mara said. It's what he was supposed to be. The version of him that lived in memory, not reality. Untouched by rhythm, unbroken by the house. Unscarred, she reached toward the mirror. The glass felt warm. Then, a hand shot out, not Kalen's, hers. From inside the glass, she yanked back hard in her throat. The hand on the other side mirrored hers exactly. Same lines. Same scars. But where Mara had dirt under her nails, the reflection had blood. It pressed its palm flat against the glass and whispered, "You left me." Mara's stomach dropped. This wasn't a warning. This was a confrontation. The version of herself that didn't survive, that got left behind, that answered the knock. She stepped back, but the reflection stayed where it was. Not angry, just aching. I didn't know, Mara said. The reflection tilted its head. You didn't want to. Nora moved beside her. Is it really you? No, Mara said softly. It's who I could have become. The mirror flickered, and for a second, dozens of versions of Mara stood in that glass, all reaching, all asking. Not for rescue. Not even for acknowledgement. Just for a place to exist. Because when you end a story too soon, all the other versions of it go somewhere, and this room had collected them. Not to haunt, to remember. Mara stepped forward again. pressed her palm against the glass. "I'm sorry." The reflection nodded, and then, without a sound, it shattered. Not violently, no shards, no screams, just disappearance. And in its place stood one sentence, carved where the mirror had been: "It only forgets if you do." Mara felt something break inside her then. Not fear, not sadness, relief, because she finally understood what the hallway was. It wasn't a trap, it wasn't a maze, it was a second chance, not to change the past, but to honor it, every version of her, every choice, every silence, every scream. They were here, not waiting for rescue, just recognition. Nora slipped her hand into Mara's. "What now?" Mara looked around. The photo with the scratched face had changed. It was blank now, waiting. She took the coal from her pocket and drew her own eyes in its center. "Now we keep going," Mara said, "until every room knows we haven't forgotten." And as they stepped out of room 23, the hallway didn't grow darker. It grew quieter, not empty, but at peace, because someone had finally come back to remember. They didn't know how long they had been walking. The hallway obeyed no clocks. Its light neither shifted nor faded, yet something changed with each step, something beneath the air, a vibration. Faint at first, like the hum of wires in a forgotten wall, but with every room they passed, the rhythm thickened. It wasn't knocking. Not this time. It was slower, heavier, a pulse. Inhale, pause, exhale. The hallway was beginning to breathe. Mara noticed it first. She stopped mid-step, one hand against the wallpaper, eyes darting along the floorboards. They weren't creaking, they were shifting. Slight rises and falls underfoot, subtle enough not to be noticed unless you stood still. But they were moving in sync with the rhythm, as if the hallway was no longer a place, as if it had become a living thing. Nora turned slowly to face, her eyes wide. "It's waking up," she whispered. Mara nodded, heart pounding. "We've been stirring it." "The rooms?" "No," Mara said. "The memory between them. Because it was never the doors that were dangerous. It was what leaked around them. The memories that slipped through the cracks. The half-finished stories that rotted in the walls. That was the heartbeat now humming under their feet. Not malice. Not hunger. Recognition. The hallway was starting to know them. And worse, it was starting to like them. They walked slower after that, not from fear, from caution. Each door they passed now gave a little shudder, like something on the other side had pressed its face against the wood, breathing in their scent. Some doors leaked heat. Others wept quietly, drops of ink pooling at their frames. One door rattled when they stepped too close. Another opened just an inch, enough to reveal an eye, not a human one, something larger, older, watching, waiting. Nora stayed close. Her hand brushed against Mara's every few steps, grounding her. There was a pull now, beneath their ribs, as if some unseen thread tied them both to something further down the corridor. They weren't wandering. They were being led. "Where are we going?" Nora asked. Mara hesitated. "I think it wants to show us something. You trust it?" "No," Mara said, her voice flat. "But I understand it, because this hallway wasn't a prison. It was a ledger. Each door a debt, each memory a receipt." And Mara, she had started writing her balance. They turned a corner. There, waiting at the end of a short hall, stood a single door unlike any they had seen before. No number, no knob, no hinges. Just smooth black wood, slick with something too dark to be water. It pulsed. Inhale, exhale. Mara felt her lungs sensing without permission. She took a step closer. So did Nora. The door was warm, not metaphorically. The closer they got, the more it radiated. Like a feverish cheek pressed to your own. Like standing too close to grief that hasn't cooled yet. And written in smudged chalk, barely legible in the shadows, "The room that wrote you." Mara froze. She didn't remember writing that. But the words felt like hers. Like they'd been pulled from her own mouth and nailed here before she ever thought them. The air thickened. The door didn't knock. It sighed. A deep, rattling exhale that smelled of forgotten lullabies and burnt sugar. Nora stepped forward first. Her hand grazed the wood. Nothing happened. But the door shifted. It peeled. The wood split, quietly, like a zipper being pulled down a long, tired back. What lay beyond was impossible, because it wasn't a room, it was a page, enormous, endless, stretching into white that bent in directions the eye couldn't follow. And on it, Mara's life. Every sentence of it, written in red, bleeding at the edges. Trembling, she stepped into it. The air changed, became paper thin. Every breath dragged letters into her throat. Her thoughts folded into paragraphs. The sound of her heartbeat became a comma. She was becoming the sentence. Nora screamed her name from behind, but Mara couldn't respond, because she had found it. The original line, the one that started it all. Written in childlike scrawl, she heard the knock but didn't run. Mara stared at it, felt the moment shatter in her chest. She had run. In her real memory, in her true life, she had hidden, behind the couch, under a blanket, too afraid to open the door. But the story, the page, lied. It rewrote her. A chill ran through her spine. She reached for the line, touched the ink. It burned. It sizzled. But she didn't pull away. She scratched it out, letter by letter. Her skin blistered. Her teeth rattled. But she didn't stop until it was gone. And in its place, she wrote. She didn't answer. She survived. The paper shuddered. The sky above the page cracked, and from behind her, a scream tore through the white. Nora, being pulled back by the hallway, because the page didn't want them both. It wanted one to finish the story, and one to carry it forward. Mara spun, lunged, grabbed her hand. But the wind on the page was stronger than any storm she had ever known. It tore at her arms, her face, her name. Letters peeled off her skin like old paint. She held tighter and shouted, not a command, not a plea, a rewrite. You're not my ending, she screamed into the wind. You're my reason. Nora blinked, cried out, and with a final heave, they flew off the page together, back through the crack in the door, back into the breathing hallway, and the door behind them sealed. No lock, no click, just finality. Mara fell to her knees, bleeding from her fingertips, but smiling, because she'd taken the pen back, and the hallway. It knew. It exhaled, like a creature finally full. The hallway no longer breathed. It watched. Its rhythm, once predictable and almost soothing in its terror, had vanished, replaced by something worse, silence that waited. Not dead silence, not empty, but the kind that follows a scream too loud to forget. The floor no longer rose or fell, and yet Mara felt movement with every step, as if something deep beneath the walls had turned its attention inward. Toward her. Toward Nora. Toward the changes they had forced onto a place that was never meant to be rewritten. They were no longer moving through memory. They were trespassing on the blueprint of the myth itself. Mara tried not to let her breathing quicken. Her fingertips still throbbed, burnt from scraping falsehoods off the page that had pretended to be her life. Her skin bore faint outlines of disappearing letters. An M here, a faint K there. The hallway was not done with her. It had merely reshaped its questions. Nora walked quietly beside her, but her eyes flickered at every corner, as though watching for shadows that hadn't yet chosen a form. They both felt it, a heaviness pressing on their shoulders, a weight made not of gravity, but expectation, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Then came the scratching, faint, barely audible, but not from behind a door. It came from the walls themselves. Mara pressed her ear to one. It sounded like fingernails, no, quills, scratching paper, writing furiously, over and over. She jerked back, because now she recognized the sound. It was her name, being written, repeatedly, scratched into every inch of this place. And not just hers. She turned to the opposite wall. Lines were being etched in real time, as though invisible hands were dragging knives through paint. Nora Kalin, Delilah, Mara, 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 Mara. The same name over and over again. Some twisted, some backwards, some erased midway. Nora stepped closer. They're cataloging us. Mara nodded. This place doesn't forget. It records. Even our disobedience. Nora swallowed hard. What happens when it's done writing? That was the question Mara didn't want to answer. Because some stories, once fully written, demanded binding. They passed a mirror. It hadn't been there before. This one was thin, long, stretched across the entire wall like someone had taken a sheet of silver and pinned it with nails. Mara looked into it, and nearly staggered. She didn't see her reflection. She saw every version of herself she denied. The liar, the coward, the girl who ran instead of knocking, the woman who opened the wrong door. They flickered behind the glass like old film footage, all staring at her with wide, accusing eyes. But they didn't move. They simply waited. Nora stood beside her reflection, and something in the mirror shifted again. This time it showed Nora in the greenhouse alone, pressing her ear to the ground, like a child listening for whispers through soil. Then a new name scratched across the glass, Seed. Mara turned toward her, heart racing. "That's you." Nora's face went pale. "What does it mean?" But before Mara could answer, the hallway shifted. Walls pressed inward by inches, almost unnoticeable if you weren't watching. But they both were, and the writing began to change. It no longer listed names, it listed intentions. Fear, escape, rewrite, survive over and over. Each word written in red, each word dripping. Then, a new line appeared at the top of the nearest door. Not carved, branded. The final author. The door was plain. Almost insultingly so, no knob, no number. Just flat, brown wood. It smelled like ink and smoke. Mara stepped toward it. Her hands shook. Not with fear, but with acceptance. Because some part of her had always known it would come to this. "Wait," Nora said, voice trembling. "You don't have to go alone." Mara looked back. "I won't," she said. "But if this is my name they keep writing, then I have to finish the sentence." She placed her palm against the door. It was cold, then warm, then nothing at all, like it wasn't there. And yet, the moment her skin touched it, the entire hallway exhaled, a final long breath, and the door peeled open. No creak, no groan, just the sound of pages turning. Inside a room of walls made entirely of books, not shelves. Books, fused spine to spine, open and fluttering, as if breathing. The floor loose paper. The ceiling torn pages layered like scales, dripping ink in slow droplets, and in the center of it all, a desk, simple, familiar. A single chair, and on the desk, a manuscript, titled Mara, a story that refused to end. Nora gasped behind her. But Mara stepped inside. She reached for the manuscript, and as her fingers grazed the first page, the room locked, not with a sound, but with finality. The pages began to turn themselves, faster, faster, words blood, sentences twisted, and Mara, standing in the eye of it all, heard a voice not spoken aloud, but burned directly into her thoughts. Finish it, or be finished by it. And suddenly, she knew. This wasn't the ending. This was the binding. And she was being asked to choose, write the truth, or become the fiction forever. The first page sliced her fingertip. Not deeply, but deliberately. Like a paper cut made by something aware of what it was doing. A drop of blood smeared across the title as she recoiled. A dark fingerprint sealing her to the thing before she could think twice. She stared down at the red, smudged words, Mara, a story that refused to end. And for the first time since entering the hallway, she understood this wasn't a warning. It was a threat. The book wanted to be finished. It needed her to write herself out. But not in ink. In blood. In memory. In truth. The pages began to turn on their own. Not blown by wind. There was none. But guided by unseen hands too impatient to wait. Each page was covered in words she didn't remember writing, but recognized all the same. There were scenes from her childhood, her hiding beneath the kitchen sink during a thunderstorm, clutching a rusted flashlight that flickered like a dying star. Her first kiss, awkward and fleeting, with a boy she would never speak to again. Her mother's voice telling her not to answer the door when the knock came, no matter how polite it sounded. Some of it was true. Some was almost true. But the rest, lies. Beautiful, poetic lies. Lies that bent her into something braver, smarter, more interesting than she truly was. The book had taken her life and polished it into fiction, and now it wanted her to sign off on it. To agree. To let it be real. But Mara didn't move. She stood still, letting the paper storm whip around her, eyes locked on the flickering script. "No," she whispered. The storm stopped. The room shuddered. Not an earthquake, a reaction. "You're not my author," Mara said louder. "You're a parasite." The walls groaned. A deep, resonant sound, as if the books themselves resented being called out. The manuscript snapped shut, and from beneath the desk, something crawled into view. It wasn't a creature. It was a shadow, shaped like a person but without detail. Just the outline of a writer. No eyes, no face, only hands, long, spidery fingers smudged with old ink and fresh blood. It held a pen, no quill, no elegance. Just a ballpoint pen, chewed at the end, held out to her like a dagger. "Sign it," the thing whispered, voice like words being torn from a diary. Mara didn't take it. Instead, she stepped forward, slow and sure. "No," she said again, firmer this time. "You don't get to finish me. You already belong to the story." The shadow hissed. "Then I'll rewrite the damn thing." The pen twitched in its hand. The shadow tilted its head. "You'll ruin the structure." "I am the structure." She grabbed the manuscript and tore it in half. Not a page, the spine. A scream ripped through the room, not hers. The walls curled inward. Pages burst into flames. The ink melted from the ceiling like tar, spattering across the floor and hissing where it landed. But Mara didn't stop. She reached into the ruined book, her hands slick with melted words, and pulled out a single, beating object, a heart. Not flesh, not symbolic. A literal throbbing heart made of pulp and paragraph. The core of the story, her story. She stared at it. It stared back, each pulse a question. "Do you still want to survive?" She squeezed. The heart convulsed, spraying ink across her chest. And then it stopped beating. The floor cracked beneath her feet. The desk dissolved into rot, and the shadow collapsed into a heap of unmoving fabric, like a costume shed by something that had never had a body to begin with. Silence followed. True silence. No heartbeat, no pages, no breath. Just Mara, standing in the rubble of a room that had tried to bind her. Then a new door opened. No knob, no noise. It simply appeared. Behind it, Nora, trembling, eyes wide. She had come back, or maybe she'd never left. Mara walked toward her, the ruined heart still dripping in her hand. "What happened in there?" Nora asked. Mara looked back, once at the room, now collapsing into itself, pages curling into ash, walls folding like paper lanterns being snuffed. "I told the story no." Nora didn't speak. She just took Mara's hand. Together, they stepped through the new door, and into something colder, something final. A room with no walls, no ceiling, just fog, and one last shape in the distance, a door, massive, stone, and on it, carved deeper than anything before, to close the first, you must open the last. Mara's heart sank, because the rhythm had returned, not in sound, but in understanding. This was the original door, the one that was never meant to open, and it was waiting for them. The fog was thick enough to choke on, not mist, not smoke, something denser, something that felt alive. It moved with them, around them, through them, each tendril slipping into the spaces behind their ears and down their spines, like fingers testing for soft spots. Mara's boots made no sound as she stepped forward, nor did Nora's. Even their breathing seemed muffled here. This wasn't silence. This was suppression. This was a room that didn't allow echoes. Because if something echoed here, it might come back wrong. The door waited ahead, ancient and impossibly tall, forged from stone that looked too smooth to be real, as if it had been carved from a single scream. It towered above them, yet it didn't loom. It watched, quietly, without menace, without mercy. It had no hinges, no handle, no knock, only a slit running down the center and a thick seam of dried blood wedged into the crack. Not painted, not metaphorical, real blood. still sticky in places, as though the last person who tried to open it hadn't finished bleeding yet. Mara approached it, pulse in her throat, the ruined story, heart still clutched in her hand. It had dried now, stiff and cracked, the last drops of ink flaking into the fog. She didn't need it anymore. She dropped it at her feet and stared up at the door, shoulders tight. "I know what this is," she said softly. Nora didn't answer, but her hand tightened around Mara's. "This isn't just a door," Mara continued. "It's the first one. The one we all came from. The one no one remembers opening." Nora's voice was a whisper. "Then why are we here? Because we've been walking in circles. All this time, trying to close the wrong endings. Trying to fix broken stories. Trying to survive stories that were never ours to begin with." She took a breath, slow and sharp. "This is where it started. Not for me, for everything." As if in response, the seam in the stone pulsed once, like a throat swallowing a name. Mara stepped closer. Her reflection flickered across the stone's surface, not the one she'd seen in mirrors before, not the bloody, splintered girl with echoes stitched into her shadow. This was younger, wide-eyed, innocent, a version of herself that still believed doors were just things that opened and closed. And then it changed. The reflection aged, rapidly, decayed, eyes hollowed, hair turned to ash, 1,000 lives, 1,000 endings playing out in seconds. Then nothing, just her. Now, alone, still standing, still refusing. She placed her palm flat against the crack, cold, colder than ice, but the door responded. It bled. A new streak of red welled up between the stones, warm and fresh, trickling down toward her hand. The blood curved as it reached her skin, following her veins, like it recognized her, or worse, claimed her. Behind her, Nora staggered. "Mara," she choked. "It's writing me?" Mara turned. Nora's arms were covered in ink. Words appeared, forming across her skin without sound, without pain. Names, phrases, the girl who waited, the seed, the silence that screamed. They wrapped around her like vines, curling down her wrists and vanishing beneath her collar. Mara ran to her, grabbing her shoulders. "You don't have to let it." But Nora only shook her head. It already did. The moment we started changing things. This place, it doesn't punish. It absorbs. Mara's breath hitched. "Then we walk away. We leave this door. We let it rot." "No," Nora said. "Because if we leave it, someone else finds it, like we did. And it starts again." That was the truth, wasn't it? They were never chosen. They were next. And if they turned back now, someone else would take their place. Some kid in a rest-stop bathroom. Some girl opening a basement door. Some boy following whispers into the dark. The stories weren't dying. They were waiting in line. The door pulsed again. And this time it whispered. Not in voice. In memory. Mara's ears flooded. Her mother calling her name the night she disappeared. Kalen's laugh before it was swallowed. The rustle of pages behind closed doors. The rhythm. The knock. The knock. The knock. 3 short, 1 long. She dropped to her knees, gasping. And that's when she realized what the door needed. Not blood. Not names. Acknowledgement. It didn't want to be opened. It wanted to be seen. Mara crawled closer, hand outstretched, and whispered the words the hallway had tried to write for her. "I remember." The stone cracked, a single fissure down the middle. Bright light leaked through, not warm, not heavenly, clinical, cold, fluorescent. Nora helped her to her feet. Mara turned. "We ended here." Nora nodded. Together they pushed. The stone split with the sound of tearing fabric, and beyond the crack, they saw it. The original room, the one the first story was written in. A typewriter sat in the center, its keys stained black, and a paper half, typed on it read. They opened the door and saw themselves. Mara and Nora stepped inside, and behind them, the door didn't close. It crumbled, ash into fog, because once seen, it could never be unseen, and once written, the story could never be told the same way again. The paper sat in the typewriter like a dare, half written, half waiting. Its white surface hummed under the flickering light. a heartbeat made of silence. The keys of the machine were stained, some with ink, others with blood, most with something in between. Nora didn't move past the threshold, her hands still clutching the splintered doorframe, as if afraid the room might snap shut the moment she stepped in. Mara stood at the center, frozen, staring at the unfinished sentence. They opened the door and saw themselves. But it wasn't true. Not exactly. They hadn't seen themselves. They had seen their possibility, their distortions. Their stories rewritten until truth became a rumor that couldn't look itself in the eye. This room, cloaked in quiet and bathed in the faint glow of fluorescent cruelty, wasn't just where the first story began. It was where the first lie was told. "This isn't where it ends," Mara said softly. "It's where someone started the script wrong." Nora nodded, stepping in slowly, and never stopped writing. The walls around them weren't made of plaster or wood. They were pages. Tight rows of yellowed paper, stitched together like skin, rippling with faint movement, as if a giant lung lay behind them. Occasionally, words on the walls would twitch, rearrange themselves, then still again. Every breath they took was documented before it was even exhaled. The typewriter sat like an altar in the middle, ancient and yet untouched by dust, keys gleaming as if polished daily by invisible hands. Mara circled it. She didn't dare touch it yet. Instead, she looked to the pile beside it. Crumpled pages tossed away, soaked in ink. Some were blank. Some held only a single line. She failed. She listened. She opened it. One page was ripped violently down the middle. Its bottom half was missing, but the top half read, "There was a girl who believed she was the first." Mara's stomach turned. These are the stories it rejected. Nora stepped closer. Or the ones that fought back. A low groan echoed through the room then, not from the door, or the typewriter, or the walls. From beneath, the floor shuddered. Not violently, but deliberately, as if something was rolling over in its sleep under their feet. The lights above them dimmed, pulsing once, and then a new page fed itself into the typewriter. No one touched it. No wind, just choice. The machine waited, the keys glistened, and the whisper came, from all around them, from the walls, from the story itself. "Finish it." But Mara didn't move, because the voice didn't sound like it came from a monster, or a trap, or even a room. It sounded like her own. Older, wiser, tired. Nora moved to her side, her voice shaking. "If you finish it, what happens?" Mara blinked, eyes locked on the page. "I think I become the one who started it, like a loop." "No." Her jaw clenched, like a trap made of endings. The first girl didn't write the truth. She wrote a way to never be forgotten. She turned her fear into a pattern, and now the story keeps feeding on it, passing the pen to whoever walks through the door next. Nora looked at the page. "Then don't finish it." But that wasn't how this room worked. The air around the typewriter thickened, pressing against them like guilt. The wall, paper behind it, fluttered. The same sentence now, repeated in perfect rhythm. They opened the door and saw themselves. They opened the door and saw themselves. They opened the door and Mara reached for the typewriter. "Wait," Nora said, grabbing her arm. But Mara wasn't typing. She was removing the page. The keys twitched under her hand, almost offended. The paper came out clean, uncreased, and she held it up, staring at the half line. She pulled out the drawer below the typewriter and found dozens more. Not pages, names. Each written once. Each crossed out. Nora gasped. Mara flipped through them. Every girl the story had consumed. Every one who tried to rewrite the ending, until she found one near the bottom. Mar H, spelled differently, but her, crossed out, dated 27 years earlier. "This is a loop," Mara said. "It eats us, over and over. Every time we try to change the ending, it just names us something else. Then how do we stop it?" Mara stared at the typewriter, not with fear, but with resolve. By not ending it at all, she placed the clean page back into the typewriter and began to type. Not a final sentence, not a solution, but a refusal. They opened the door. And then they walked away. She pressed the period key slowly. The typewriter didn't explode. The lights didn't flicker. But something shifted. The pages on the wall peeled away, one by one, falling like dead leaves, revealing blank stone beneath. The heartbeat under the floor slowed, and the room exhaled, not in defeat, not in satisfaction, in relief, because someone finally told the story it was too afraid to write, the story that left. Mara stood, tore the paper from the machine, folded it once, twice, and tucked it into Nora's jacket pocket. "We're not going to be remembered for how we survived," she said. "We'll be remembered for how we walked away." And together, they turned toward the crumbling doorway behind them. No hallway waited, no fog, no rhythm, just dirt, a path, a world that had forgotten them. And now, they could finally forget it back. The sky above them was the wrong shade of gray. It wasn't the dreamy silver of overcast mornings or the bruised violet of storm-heavy evenings. It was flat, hollow, like someone had painted over the sky with a layer of forgetfulness, so thick even the sun couldn't argue its way through. Mara and Nora stood at the edge of the ruined threshold, backs to the story that had tried to devour them, and faces tilted toward a world that should have felt familiar. But nothing was right. Not the color of the sky, not the smell of the air, not the way the wind refused to carry sound, because something had followed them out. Not immediately, not loudly, but with the patience of a ghost that no longer needed doors to haunt someone. At first, it was subtle. The crunch of gravel beneath feet that weren't theirs. The shadows of trees swaying in windless silence. The way the horizon bent inward, like the earth itself was leaning closer to listen. Nora noticed it first. A flicker in her peripheral vision, gone the second she turned, but it left something behind. A scent, old paper, candle wax, and something beneath it all. Too raw to be a smell, the copper sting of memory being rewritten mid-thought. Mara clutched her jacket tighter. The folded page inside crinkled against her chest, the sentence she had typed still trembling with power. They opened the door. And then they walked away. But walking away didn't mean escaping. It didn't mean freedom. Not yet. Because the story, the real one, the one that had coiled its ink, drenched fingers around their names, wasn't gone. It was hungry. And hunger doesn't end when the food runs off. Hunger follows. They moved quickly, though there was no clear destination. The path beneath them was dry, cracked, and impossibly straight, like it had never learned to curve. They passed no towns, no houses, just broken signs with words smeared into illegibility. The world around them felt unfinished, like a draft that had been abandoned halfway through. "We didn't come back to the real world," Nora said finally. Mara nodded. "We came to the part of the story where the writer stopped typing, and it's waiting." Mara looked back. The door had vanished. In its place, a scar in the ground, a thin black line, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. The kind of line you might mistake for a crack in the dirt. But it wasn't a crack. It was a seam. And it was widening. They set up camp that night beneath a broken billboard that once advertised a movie no one remembered. The stars overhead didn't shine. They watched, pale and dull and unmoving, as if painted on glass. Nora couldn't sleep. Every time her eyes closed, she heard a whisper, not in her ears, in her teeth. "Knock, knock, knock, knock." It echoed in the root of each molar like a message tapping its way through bone. Mara sat by the fire, fingers pressed against the folded page. It was warm. Too warm. It hadn't cooled since they left the room. She unfolded it slowly, her breath hitching as she read the line again. The ink had spread. Grown. The sentence no longer ended at the period, and they opened the door. And then they walked away. But the story followed. Her mouth went dry. She showed it to Nora. "I didn't write that." Nora stared at the page. Then who did? They both knew the answer. The story was writing itself again, desperate to survive, and it was using them to do it. The next day, the changes became impossible to ignore. Road signs began showing their names, first in graffiti, then on official markers, then on memorial plaques. They passed a rusted bench that read in memory of Mara, the girl who refused to finish. A gas station billboard said Nora Kalin says knock 3 times to forget. It was building them into its world. Again, only this time. The story wasn't behind them. It was underneath them. Threaded into the seams of the ground, printed into the clouds, stitched into the shadows of trees. They could feel it deep beneath their skin, an itching, not on the surface, but inside the bones. Like someone was tracing sentences through their marrow. We can't just keep walking, Mara said, voice raw. We have to choose something, or it'll keep writing us. Nora turned slowly. Choose what? To make it stop. For real, Nora looked away. What if it doesn't want to stop? Then we write a new ending anyway. That night, Mara took out a pen. Not the cursed one. Not the story's pen. Just a regular one. With cracked plastic and a stubborn ink flow. She took the folded paper from her jacket, unfolded it fully, and beneath the line the story had added, she wrote, but the story couldn't follow where there were no names left to write. And as the ink dried, the sky shifted. The stars blinked, the wind returned, and for the first time since stepping out of that hallway, they heard birdsong. Distant, weak, but real. The page crumbled in her hands, not from age, from release. Like it had finished its job and was allowed to vanish. Mara didn't cry. Nora did. Not from fear. From relief. The story hadn't been defeated, but it had been confused. And confusion, in a world that ran on rhythm, was the first real crack they'd made in the wall. They moved forward. 1 step. Then another. And behind them, the seam in the dirt closed. Not by force. Not by threat. But by choice. Because even stories, especially the dangerous ones, end when no one is willing to carry them anymore. The birdsong didn't last. It fractured, split, turned to static, as if the sound had been borrowed from something older. Something that only remembered what birds were supposed to sound like. It warped in their ears, too slow and too high. Like a cassette tape melting inside itself. Nora froze in the middle of the road, eyes scanning the treetops that now loomed on either side of them. Trees that hadn't been there the day before. Trees that hadn't grown but appeared. Birthed from a world that had begun to correct itself, but not without punishing them for interrupting the rewrite. Mara could feel it too. Something had closed, and something else had opened in its place. You hear that? She asked. Nora didn't answer. Her gaze had locked on a patch of trees about 30 feet ahead, where the shadows were moving against the wind. They curled inward, like fingers pulling back into a fist, wrapping tightly around something hidden. A sound began rising from within those woods, not a growl, not a scream, a breath, one long, rattling inhale. The forest was breathing. It wasn't a metaphor anymore. The trees bowed in unison with the rhythm of lungs that had never been human. The dirt pulsed. The air pressed tighter around their necks. Nora grabbed Mara's wrist and pulled her back. We're not done, she whispered. It didn't end. No, Mara said. It just changed shape. They turned to run, back the way they came. But the road behind them had collapsed into words. Literal lines of text etched into the earth, hundreds of feet long, repeating a single sentence over and over in different handwriting. Different voices. She walked too far and found what wasn't hers. They backed away from the living paragraph and toward the trees, and the breathing got louder, thicker, hotter. Mara stumbled, because she saw it now, just beyond the writhing trunks. A house. Not a cabin, not a ruin. A full, 2-story Victorian-style house, impossibly clean, almost glowing, sitting calmly in the middle of the woods as though it had been there forever. Porch light on. Curtains drawn, a welcome mat out front. Nora's voice dropped. I've seen that house. Mara turned sharply. Where? In my dreams. Since I was a kid. Every time I tried to remember my father's face, I'd see that house instead. The house didn't move. But the forest shifted again, a soft rumble like laughter through leaves. They had no choice now. The road was gone. The woods behind them were whispering their names. The air buzzed with static words, glitching into phrases that had no right being spoken aloud. So they walked, slowly, toward the house. Each step felt written. Each crunch of gravel beneath their feet carried weight, like the earth was documenting every moment, stamping their journey into its bones. As they reached the porch, Mara hesitated. The doorknob gleamed. Polished, used. This door wasn't like the others. It didn't promise revelation. It didn't promise escape. It promised something worse. Closure. But not the kind they wanted. The kind you find at the bottom of an empty bottle or the end of a cliff. She placed her hand on the knob. It was warm. Too warm. The house was alive. Before she could turn it, the door creaked open, on its own, and behind it, not a hallway, not a room, but a single chair, facing them, with someone sitting in it. Mara stepped through, and her knees almost buckled, because the man sitting in the chair looked exactly like her, older, weathered, eyes sunken, skin pale. But it was her, or a version. He looked up, smiled, and spoke in a voice that shouldn't exist. "You finally made it home." Nora remained frozen at the threshold. Mara swallowed, the floorboards creaking under her weight. "Who are you?" The man leaned back. "I'm the one who stayed. The one who didn't walk away. The one who said yes when the story asked to be finished." "You're not real," she whispered. "Oh, I'm real enough. Real enough to replace you if you turn back." He gestured to the window beside him. The glass showed another world. One where Mara had never left the story behind. Where she stayed, finished it, became its caretaker, its host. She saw herself smiling at guests, opening the door for new visitors, inviting them in, feeding it. "This house isn't a place," the man said. "It's a position, a role. You either leave and forget, or you stay and remember everything forever." Mara turned toward Nora, whose face had gone pale. "But I wrote the ending," she argued. "I broke it." "No," the man said, smiling wider. "You paused it. You left space between the sentences." And something slithered in. He rose slowly. Hands out, not threatening. Welcoming. "You can still leave. The road will rebuild. But it'll always find someone else. Always look for the next girl to hear a knock. Unless someone stays." Mara stepped back. Nora grabbed her arm. "You don't belong here," Nora whispered. Mara looked once more at the version of herself standing by the window now, framed in golden light, smiling with a sadness too vast to carry. "I don't want to be the one who remembers," Mara said. "You already are," the man answered. The door behind them began to close. On its own, fast. They bolted, leaped through the shrinking gap, landed hard on the dirt outside. The door slammed shut behind them, and didn't reopen. They ran. No path, no sign. Just forward. The forest didn't chase, because it didn't need to. It had time. It always had time. They didn't stop until the trees thinned, and the sky brightened, and they felt the road beneath their feet again. Real road, with tire marks and trash and the faint hum of distant traffic. They collapsed on the pavement. Mara looked up. Above them, clouds moved. Birds circled. And in the distance, a gas station. Lit, occupied, ordinary, normal. But when she turned to Nora, something was written across her arm in ink too faint to be real. "Remember the house." The gas station flickered like an illusion, standing alone on a stretch of road that should have felt safe, maybe even boring, if not for the humming inside Mara's skull. A low vibration, not heard but felt, like a name being spoken behind her teeth. She stared at the neon Opan sign, and it stared back, unblinking, daring, as if it had been waiting, not for a customer, but for a confession. Nora stood beside her, quiet, the last traces of ink still bleeding faintly along her wrist. "Remember the house," it read. Not a warning, a command. They crossed the road slowly, each step heavier than the last, the kind of heaviness that came not from fear, but from memory. That house, the doppelganger, the breathing walls, the story that refused to die, hadn't left them. It was now inside them. The gas station door jingled as they entered, cheerful in a way that felt mocking, too bright for a place like this. Inside was empty, too empty. No cashier, no music. Only the buzzing of overhead lights and the faint scent of something long expired. The aisles were full but untouched, chips perfectly stacked, drinks all faced forward, candy unnaturally uniform. It was as if the store was posed, arranged for the illusion of normal. Nora hesitated at the entrance while Mara took cautious steps toward the back counter. "Hello," she called. No answer. But something moved in the back, a shift, a whisper of plastic scraping linoleum. Nora followed, but kept her eyes scanning the mirrors overhead. Round black domes that usually housed security cameras, but these, they reflected nothing. No shelves, no ceiling, just eyes, watching, blinded by their own stare. Mara pushed through the swinging door that led behind the counter. There were no cigarettes, no register, just a wall of keys. Dozens of them, all tagged with little pieces of yellowed tape. Some read Arom 4, some read Stioraji, one read Dio Now Tarn. But the one that caught Mara's eye was near the center. It read Mayorh Suskone DRFT. Her fingers hovered over it. Nora stepped beside her. "It knows what?" Mara asked, though the answer was already a sickness in her mouth. "That we changed it. That we tried to leave." Mara grabbed the key. The moment her skin touched it, the lights in the station cut out. Total darkness. Not like night, but like erasure. The world blotted out. Then came the sound, a printer, old, dot matrix. Wheezing and grinding in a rhythm that should have been long extinct. Somewhere behind them, something was being printed on paper that didn't want to hold words. And then the lights snapped back. Everything was the same. But the key was gone. In Mara's hand now was a ticket. Printed on the back was a date, tomorrow's. Below it, a phrase STOR Rasteroid. ENTR PR me TD. Mara turned the ticket over. A map, not detailed, not helpful. Just a single road coiling into a spiral, and in the center an eye. It blinked. Only once. But it blinked. "This isn't over," Nora whispered. "It wants us back." "No," Mara said, voice shaking. "It wants us to bring someone with us." They left the gas station without taking anything. Not food, not drink. The world outside was too still now, like it had been paused. And then they saw the car. Old, familiar, Kalen's. Parked by the side of the road as if he'd just gone in to grab a soda. But they had watched him vanish. He had become the knock, the noise, the echo in the hallway. He had become part of it. And yet there he was, sitting behind the wheel, eyes open, smiling, not at them. At the mirror hanging from the rear view, because in the mirror Mara saw herself, not standing beside Nora, but standing behind Kalen in the back seat, mouth sewn shut, eyes pleading, hair soaked in ink. Mara stumbled back. Nora caught her. The car engine turned over, roared once, and then Kalen drove off. No tire marks, no dust, just silence. And in the spot where the car had been, a book, closed, hardcover, bound in skin the color of old secrets. Mara bent down. On the cover, etched without ink, THEHRDDRAFT, and beneath that, to write the last version, she must become the story. Nora didn't speak. She didn't need to, because they both understood now they hadn't escaped. They had only flipped the page. The story was still hungry, still watching, still rewriting. But now it was offering them something worse than death, a pen to finish what had been started, and to finally decide what version of Mara would live and which ones would be read aloud. The book was heavier than it looked, not just in weight, but in presence. Mara held it like a loaded gun, and truthfully, it might have been more dangerous. The cover throbbed faintly in her hands, as if it had veins beneath the leather, a pulse that didn't match hers, but knew her well enough to pretend. The title shimmered in the weak daylight, THEHRDDRFT. There were no author names, no publisher, no clues. Only the line at the bottom that whispered a threat disguised as destiny. To write the last version, she must become the story. Nora didn't speak, but her eyes did. They screamed. They begged Mara to put it down. burn it, throw it into a ditch. But the truth was clear between them now. There was no running from this. The story hadn't ended. The house, the hallway, the mirror reflections, they weren't fragments. They were roots. And this book was the fruit. A car horn wailed in the distance, one long, mournful blare that didn't stop. It was a call, a signal. And somewhere deep in Mara's chest, something old and forgotten answered back. They followed the map on the back of the ticket. The road coiled like a noose, winding in tighter and tighter spirals, pulling them toward the eye at the center. Not metaphorically, not in metaphor. Literally. They walked for hours, though time didn't pass. The sun hung in the same spot, bleeding amber across the horizon like it was dying, but too proud to admit it. Finally, they reached the end. But it wasn't a destination. It was a library. Massive. Crumbling. Half submerged in earth like the ground had tried to eat it but choked on the contents. Its outer walls were tattooed in writing, every brick scrawled with ink that danced and twitched like it had a heartbeat of its own. The door, unlike the others they had faced, didn't wait politely. It opened for them, unprompted, exhaling a gust of warm air that smelled of rotting pages and old breath. They stepped inside, and the door closed behind them with a sound that felt final. Inside, it was endless, a true labyrinth. Shelves stretched toward a ceiling they couldn't see, filled with books that looked wounded. Pages missing, words scratched out, titles rewritten in smeared ink. Some shelves were splintered, as if something had clawed through them. Others were pristine, untouched, as though waiting for a story worth reading. In the center of it all stood a podium, and on that podium sat another book, open, waiting. The same sentence scrawled across every page. Begin again. Mara clutched the third draft closer. Why here? She asked. Why bring us here? Nora's voice was tight. Because this is where stories go when they rot. It's where they remember themselves. The floor shifted beneath their feet, only slightly, but enough. Something below them was moving, climbing. The library was not just full of books. It was full of versions, of people, of Mara, of every girl who had tried to walk away and been rewritten instead. They weren't dead. They were shelved. Nora found the first one before Mara did, a spine labeled Mara, 5th attempt. She pulled it down, trembling. Inside was a full life, a version of Mara who became a teacher, fell in love, died at 87 with a whisper in her throat and peace in her chest. The next version was worse. Mara, 2nd correction. In that one, she never left the hallway. She became the knock, the voice behind the walls, a character no one remembered writing, trapped in a cycle of repetition and shadow. More shelves, more versions. Mara, untitled. Mara, redacted. Mara, draft never sent. Each one a possibility, each one a punishment. Mara stared at them all, and for the first time, felt herself unraveling. What if none of them were me, she asked. What if I've only ever been an outline? Nora gripped her hand. Then let's write you for real. One version. The last one. One they can't change. Mara stepped toward the podium. The blank book was still open, but this time it spoke. Not out loud, not with sound, with memory. Images poured into her mind. Nora's screams, Kalen's laugh, the basement, the breath in the walls, the Doppelganger. The house that remembered her. Every chapter of her life rewound, replayed, re-edited. The book wasn't offering her a chance to write, it was trying to edit her again. Mara stepped back. No. The library trembled, the books hissed. Something growled between the shelves, a low, scraping noise like fingernails dragging across typewriter keys. Mara took the third draft from under her arm, and she threw it on the podium. It landed with a thud, closed, defiant. She pulled the lighter from her pocket, the one they'd taken from the gas station when they left the hallway the first time. Flicked it. The flame wobbled, then held steady. Nora's breath hitched. Are you sure? No, Mara said, and dropped it on the book. It caught fast, pages curling, ink boiling. The podium cracked, and from the shelves, screams, not of pain, of release. One by one, the books began to burst into flame. Ink flew into the air like birds escaping a cage. Names screamed from the rafters. Mara, Nora, Kalen, the girl with no exit. The story was burning. Finally, for real. And at the center of it all, Mara stood still. Watching. Not afraid. Not anymore. The library didn't collapse. It peeled away, like old skin, like curtains pulled back. And behind it, the world. The real one. Sky, wind, color, time. And Mara took Nora's hand. And they stepped forward, through the ashes, into light. The wind that touched their faces felt like truth. Not the kind found in revelations or epiphanies, but the deep, wordless kind. The truth of breath, of touch, of silence not being empty. As Mara and Nora emerged from the ruins of the library that had tried to archive them into oblivion, the world around them didn't cheer or shimmer or bloom. It simply was, real, imperfect, and not watching. For the first time in too long, there were no whispers behind their steps, no doors knocking themselves open, no stories trailing them like smoke. Just sky, just air, and the weight of their own choices finally settling back into their skin. They walked until the suit faded from their clothes, and the smell of burned ink drifted off their hair like forgotten dreams. Their hands stayed clasped, fingers tight as if letting go even once might invite the shadows back. But the road they followed now wasn't scripted. It wound. It turned. It lost itself between hills and forests, and didn't care about symmetry or symbolism. It was messy, unpredictable, alive. At a small diner tucked between nothing and nowhere, they stopped. Not because it was important, not because it was part of the pattern, but because they were hungry, human. The sign above the door blinked with one broken letter. The smell of frying eggs and burned coffee reached them before the door even opened. Inside, everything was so ordinary it made Mara want to cry. They sat. They ordered. They didn't talk about the book, or the house, or the girl who had looked just like her, but smiled like she'd buried 1,000 versions of herself. Instead, they laughed, quietly, clumsily, and when the waitress brought their food, she dropped a receipt between them with a wink. Only, it wasn't a receipt, it was a page. Typed. Plain. But familiar. Too familiar. Mara's fork hovered mid-air. Nora read aloud, barely breathing. They thought they had walked away. But stories don't end when you close the book. They end when no one remembers the title. Below it, a signature in thick black ink, Kalen. Mara looked up so fast her neck popped. But the waitress was gone. The booth behind them was empty. The cook in the back had stopped clattering pans. The silence was too clean. The kind of silence that happens just before something is rewritten. Mara stood. The page trembled in her hands. Nora was already moving toward the door, scanning the windows, trying not to say it, but already knowing it. They hadn't finished the story, because Kalen had left a footnote, a sequel. Outside, the sky had changed, imperceptibly at first, but wrong all the same. The clouds were still, too still. Not painted, not digital, just paused. The air smelled like ink again, not fresh ink, but dried, like something had been written behind their backs while they weren't looking. The road that had wound through hills now ran straight again, unbroken, leading to a horizon that looked flat and fake and waiting. I thought we burned it, Nora whispered. Mara gripped the paper. We did. Then why? Because we didn't bury it. The story hadn't ended. It had regrouped. And now it wanted something new. Not to trap them, not to repeat, to be told again, to evolve, to live outside the page. I'm done. Nora said, I can't go back in. We won't, Mara replied. But we'll choose this time. And with that, she tore the page in half. Not gently. Not ritually. Just like someone ripping up a menu they didn't order from. The wind kicked up. The world blinked. The horizon shifted, hesitated, and then kept going. The page turned to ash in her hand, but this time, the ash didn't rise or form letters or whisper anything clever. It just fell. To the earth. Dead, and they walked. Not toward danger. Not away from it. Just forward. Together, toward a story that no one else would write for them. Because some stories don't end with a twist or a scream. Some end with choice, with silence, with a girl who stopped being a character and started being real. And in the end, the last word never needed to be written, because they lived it.